Welcome Bruce Collier. He's been here before. He was going to talk to us about uniform grants guidance and some of the changes in the new circulars. He'll have two sessions, so we'll have a small, we won't have lunch right at that time, so I have to move that down. So, but we'll have a break around that time. So, and I know, did everybody get it? Either an iPad back there, or if you have your own device, where there's a way you can get the information for today's package. So we'll have some iPads back there that you can pick one up and be able to follow along. So again, please help me welcome Bruce Collier.
I'd like to congratulate Jason on becoming a doctor. I found that out this morning. So, good morning, and thank you for asking me to be here. I would like to tell you that one of my objectives is to try to allay some of the fears that have been instilled in me by a lot of people that have been presenting these.
Turn it on.
Do I need to just hold it up here?
Yeah, you probably have to put it a little higher.
It's like a corsage. Yeah. Can you all hear me now? Okay, good. Well, like I was going to say, I hope that what I can do is help alleviate some of the fears that you might have had if you've heard the same speeches I've heard about what we're supposed to do with the new Omni Circular, or some people are calling it the Super Circular. I've heard some speeches, and when I got through with them, I thought, my goodness, are we really going to have to do that? But I think I can kind of help out and make them not sound quite so difficult. So I'm not sure what's happening out here with it.
He's gonna check.
That's going to be first one, and the second one comes right after that.
Hello. I think you might want to use this for now. It's not gonna go out and try to change the
Okay. So you need to get one other thing. Yes, this is now. I'm going to be switching back and forth between the handout that you all have. Did you get that in electronic form and download it to your personal device? Okay. If you didn't, then we can make sure that you get that. I had sent that to Elizabeth, and I guess we didn't get it out to everybody. But you will be able to see everything that's up here. And in addition to that, I'm going to be going through some PowerPoint slides. In fact, this is kind of the way I organize my thoughts, is with a PowerPoint slide. That's the outline of what we'll be doing. And from time to time, we'll go back for references back to that other material. But included in the handout material is both all the PowerPoint slides you've seen and then the pages where we have the references. There is one item that I will be going to that we do not have up here, and let me see if it's, no, that's not it. I will load it after a while, but it is on the website, and I'll do that during our break because it pertains to the TRS material. So I'm on for 2 periods here. I'm not sure we'll take 2 hours. We may take twice that, or we may take half that. So it's up to you all. When you get tired, just get up and leave. Or if you're thirsting for more knowledge as we get toward the end, let me know. If you have questions, I'll be really happy to answer them. Once again, my objective is to take out some of the fear that has been produced with some of the information that's coming out on these topics. And so let me go on with the next part, what I would like for us to do also is recognize that both in the area of the super circular, or the omni-circular as we're going to call it, in the area of the omni-circular, or in the area of TRS, in both of those areas, there are two things that are very, very important now that are being stressed at the federal level and at the state level in both of the categories, and also with the AICPA and GASB. And the first one of those is that you should have some really strong internal controls. The controls should be put in place so that items are not recorded in error, and there are checks to make sure that what you do have recorded is appropriate, and then what you send forward to the other parties that are involved. For example, the data that you send to TRS is well controlled. So internal control is one of the things that's a factor. And then the other thing, and this relates of course to internal control, is that you need to document a lot. When I went through the super circular, it seemed to me that the most significant changes that they've made is in the level of documentation. Now, here's the way I'm going to try to settle some of your fears. And as we go through this, you may say, yes, I agree that that's true. I attended a meeting on Monday at TASBO, and it was presented by Mara Ash. And there were a lot of things in there that sounded like they were brand new. But in the same meeting, there were several people from different school districts with me. There was a group from the Isleta ISD, which is out in El Paso. It's a very large school district. And then there were people from much smaller school districts that were closer into Central Texas. And in every case, we'd get to something we'd be talking about, and someone would say, well, we already do that, don't we? And probably the answer for most of y'all on some of the things we'll be talking about is yes, we do. And then the response from Mara was, do you have it in writing? And in some cases they said, well, most of it, or some of them said, no, not at all, etc. So one of the things that we need to do is get some of this stuff in writing. Another part that I think would help allay your fears is that the second day at TASBO that I went to a meeting, there was a presenter there named Becky Estrada. Many of you probably already know her. She's been the president of TASBO, and she is currently the Chief Executive Financial Officer at Lacktown Air Force Base ISD. And Becky, when she was making the presentation that she did, brought in some of the things that she had already put together, some schedules and some templates and stuff like that. And she said, you're welcome to use these in any way that they're helpful to you. And so she's going to make those available to you all. So if you're looking for a starting place, that'll be a starting place. If you're already doing some stuff, you already have lots of documentation, that can be your starting place. But so from now on, what we're going to do is talk about how you make sure that you are in compliance with the new federal guidelines. And so let's talk now about the Uniform Grants Guidance. That's what a lot of people are calling the Omni-Circular. Actually, it has a much more lengthy technical name. Let's see, it's called the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Audit Awards. For federal awards. So that's the full name, but you can see that's just a whole lot of stuff to say. And there are a number of names that this has gone by. One of them is the Omni-Circular, because what we've done is taken a whole bunch of circulars and kind of put them together. Another one is the Super Circular. And then there are at least two more that I've heard that I can't say in this audience. And most of those have come from my mouth too. So, okay, anyway, we're going to be talking about the administrative requirements here and the various circulars that we have merged and how they've come together. Now, why did we do this? Well, it was important for us to do this because all of these circulars came from different backgrounds, and they were very similar. They had almost identical requirements, but not identical implementations. So for example, one of the requirements was cost control. And the group that came from municipalities and that kind of thing, those kinds of grants, had one category of cost control. A similar but slightly different category of cost control would be for grant research like they do at universities, and then for school districts and so forth. So we had just a whole bunch of different cost control concepts that were all pointed toward one objective, and that is control of cost. And OMB took a look at this and said it's silly for us to have all these different things that are applying all around when basically they're the same thing. And so they set about revising the guidelines here and merging them into a single guideline. Now, that single guideline comes out in 3 different patterns. One of them is administrative controls, and those are all going to be similar now. Well, they'll all be in one part of the circular. And then there'll be some things on cost control. That'll be in another part. And then the final part will be in audit. And so we're going to have these 3 major parts. What I had planned to do on my discussion today is spend most of the time on the audit. But I think I will spend more time now on the administrative part and a little bit on cost control and move into audit. I'll still spend a fair amount of time in the audit area because the audit area is not just for auditors, it's for auditees. And all of you all are auditees too, right? How many of you love your auditor? Now let's be honest. How many of you hug your auditor when he comes in the door or when she comes in the door? Yeah, we all do, right? Baloney. But so anyway, you know, we have auditors that a lot of this is directed to, but a lot of it also is directed to you. So, for example, one of the things that you all have to do is prepare some reports. A part of the reports that you submit to TEA and to others are prepared by the auditor. What are the parts that are prepared by the auditor? The parts that the auditor has sole responsibility for. The opinions and findings of question and cost. Now there are 3 different categories of opinions. There's the general purpose opinion. That's the one where it says the financial statements fairly present. That's one opinion. Then there's the opinion that says that there has been adequate control or has not been adequate control. It's a comment about the controls that are in place. And then the other one is in major federal programs, we have compliance. Now the compliance thing also applies a little bit to just everything, but the opinion on that is issued there applies to the federal programs, major federal programs that have been audited. So that's all the auditor is responsible for. What are you all responsible for? Everything else. Do we have any auditors in our presence right now? Okay. Now, when we get into it later on, we're going to talk quite a bit about selecting a major program. What is a major program? How is it different from a major fund? See, those are 2 different concepts. I wish we had used the same term. A major fund is determined by the size of your fund or the presumed risk or the presumed importance of it that pertains to you. If you say this is a very important fund, it's not really a big one, but it's an important fund, we want to make it a major fund. You can do that. The auditors can't do that for you. You do that. On the other hand, the major program, the auditors go through and then select the programs that are federally funded, that are large and or risky, and a combination of size and risk combined. And so the auditors pick what's a major fund. Now, I'm going to assert to you all, and when we get through with the program, I hope you'll be able to sit here and say, I know what's going to be a major fund in my school district because I know the rules on how they pick it. And when I follow through on those rules on how they pick a major fund, I can figure out exactly which ones are going to be major. So you'll be able to do that. So there are no surprises here. Everything is just way up front. So, well, with that as kind of a background here, let's look at the circulars that they merged. This was done by this Council on Financial Assistance Reform. You know how we are at the federal government. We have to have acronyms for everything. We have that for the state government too, don't we? And in fact, are y'all wrestling with the new indirect cost material right now? Are you getting information about the indirect cost report? Boy, is that a pain in the neck. Well, I don't really know what it is because I don't know anything about it. And from all I can gather from what's been published from TEA, they don't know anything about it either. So, you know, it's a mystery, right? It's a mystery. But they were very clever in one thing. They named the new one ICRAP. Now, I really asked you, do we need that acronym? Well, they agreed. They cut out the A. but that's what they had. We're going to, instead of doing Exhibit J2, you're going to do ICRAP. Okay? So, but anyway, we have this other acronym up here, the Council on Financial Assistance Reform. And it took those 3 parts we talked about a while ago. The administration requirements appeared in 3 separate circulars. Some of them apply to schools. I think that A102, that's the one we used to call the common rule. And then the A110, I don't know, A110 and A89, either hospitals or research institutions. I don't really remember which one. But, and then they also took the reforms. We are always referring in our compliance supplements to, we have complied with the rules in A87. You remember, you always say that, you have to sign off on that one. That's the one that applies to us. But Circular 821 and A122 have applied to us at least a little bit in the past. Mostly right now we look at A87. So, but they're all very similar. They're close to one another in their content. So what we needed to do was combine those. And then the reforms to the audit requirements are in A133. And almost nobody that is subject to a single audit has something different from A133 except hospitals, and they're A50. So the hospital component that is similar to A133 now is going to be just merged into what we have as a continuing process of A133. So when you look at section F in the new Omni Circular, you're going to find that A133, the section there, section F and A133, are almost identical. And we're going to point out in here after a while the fairly minute differences between the two. So if you're saying, well, how am I ever going to handle all this change? You don't need to worry about it because the change is so subtle. And I'm going to guess that for the most part, you're already doing almost all of it. There's one thing that's going to be nice for you, that is they're going to raise the thresholds. Now, how many of y'all come from very, very small school districts? Okay, then don't worry about the thresholds, don't matter to you anyway. If you have received and expended $500,000 of federal financial assistance this year, you're subject to the Single Audit Act audit. Now, most of y'all have received a lot more than $500,000, right? How many of you have received $10 million? Yeah, bunches of you. Okay, so how many of you have received $25 million? Okay, are y'all Houston? Okay, well now you're going to see change in Houston, but it's not because of 25 million, it's because we're going to push something up to about 40 million in an area that has an impact on you all. So, but when we get to 40 million, y'all get more than that too. Don't you get about 47.5 million? All right, so, you know, when we get up to those really big numbers like that, it's not going to affect you at all, except, you know, you're going to have a few things that instead of using 100,000 with your Type B programs as a cutoff point, we're going to move that up a bit. So there might be some things that are cutoffs there. But here's what does affect all of us quite a bit. They're dropping the amount of coverage that you have to have in the coverage of major programs if you are a low-risk auditee. And they're dropping that right now. If you're a low-risk auditee, you have to cover at least 25% of your total federal financial assistance. We're going to drop that down to 20%. Now that sounds like a fairly small drop, doesn't it? But it could have a fairly significant impact. More importantly though, in the past, every time you have a Type A low-risk program that we put on the shelf to see if we can replace it with a Type B high-risk program, we bring in the Type B high-risk program. We used to bring those in one for one. Okay, now you're going to have 4 low-risk Type A programs for 1 high-risk Type B. So it's not going to be a 1 for 1. Now, there's kind of a funny quirk there. Can you audit a fourth of a program? That makes no sense, right? It's like saying we had half an airplane flight. Boy, that sounds disastrous, doesn't it? We got halfway there, it was half full, it was half fun. Well, you know, there are all kinds of different interpretations, so it has to be an integer. So I think if you have 1 low-risk Type A program, you'll have to have 1 high-risk Type B program. If you have 2 low-risk Type A programs, you'll have 1 low-risk Type B. If you have 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 2. See how that's going to work? So then we're going to be moving those thresholds around, and that's going to help Houston. All the rest of it, if y'all want to, you can go out and get some coffee or something, because it really doesn't change much of what you do, except for the idea of who's a low-risk auditee. Okay? So we're going to be getting into that in just a minute. All right, so these are the changes that we've had, and in your manual that you hopefully will get, on page 12 we have some selections of the table of contents. Now I'm going to go back to that page 12 and pick up the table of contents there. sorry for my ineptitude here on this. I'm using theirs, and I usually don't do that, although I'm happy I can use theirs. It's very convenient, but since I'm not used to this, I have to kind of wander around on the keyboard a little bit. Y'all have had that experience, I suppose. And if you are really well versed in computer technology and stuff like that, you have no problem at all. But I'm not that well versed yet. I keep working at it. And I imagine you probably can't see this where you are. Is that correct? Let me see if I can make this just a little bit bigger. Okay. Now can you see that? Even back toward the back. All right, notice what we have here. Subpart A is going to be acronyms and definitions, and then subpart B will be general provisions. That's that general administration that we talked about just a minute ago. That's where they brought those three old circulars in together and just merged them. We're going to look at more detail on subpart B in a little bit. Subpart C is for pre-federal award information. What you might want to do, I don't have much detail on this, but when you go to the super circular in the table of contents, they have more detail on what's in subpart C. And I learned that that's an area that you probably need to concentrate on related to some of the programs that you're getting into. Now, if you're working with Title I Part A, you do that every year, don't you? That's basically, you roll it forward every year. There's no significant changes in Title I Part A. So the pre-federal award activities may not be quite as important as if you're getting a brand new program. And so you need to make sure that there's a funding date for the program, like July 1 through June 30, and then you're carried forward until about the end of September, so you can clean up some of the commitments you had. But what if you had some expenditures in May and June to get ready for that July 1? Unless you have some pre-award allowances for that, you can't count those. Okay, so you need to make sure that you get clearance for pre-award work, and so that section on pre-federal award requirements is a very important section for you if you have lots of new programs. And so now let's look at Part D, post-federal award requirements. Well, those are things that we're already doing quite a bit of. How many days do you have after the end of the program before you get all your encumbrances brought in and billed out and invoiced, and you make your disbursements and finally wind up with the final part of the program? Well, there's a date for your encumbrances, there's a date for getting all the invoices, there's a date for making the payments, and if you do it after that, you just lose the money. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff we have on post-federal awards. Now, in between these two, though, there's another thing that is important, and that is that you need to make sure that you are keeping up with your claims for reimbursement from TEA. Most of the federal programs that we have are reimbursement type programs. That means you spend the money, TEA reimburses you. And some school districts, I know, take a long time before they make a claim to get reimbursed for it. And what TEA is doing now with some of their responsibilities as an overseer, pass-through entity now is going to be an oversight agency, and their responsibilities of that, they watch how you call down your money. And if you don't call it down fairly frequently, then they're going to start saying, well, they're not using the money, we're going to transfer it to somebody else where it's more needed. So you ought to be sure that you're calling down your money on a regular basis. And the recommendation that was made in Austin on Monday was no more seldom than once a quarter. And so I said, well, Mara, can we call it down once a week? And she said, sure. And then, being a jerk, I said, how about every day? Well, you could do that if you want to. Now, do any of y'all want to call it down every day? No, probably not. But you see, if you do your accounting system correctly, your system is going to tell you what should be called down, what could be called down, and you could do that every time you make an entry. What you do now, when you book an expenditure, is concurrently book a due from TEA and a revenue. So if we pay payroll, we're going to debit payroll expenditure and credit cash. We're going to concurrently debit due from TEA and credit Title I revenue. Okay, and then right at the end of whenever you want, daily, weekly, monthly, you send TEA a bill, or you don't send them a bill, you just go online and call it down. And so that way now, instead of working out of your pocket all the time, you can work out of the pocket that's supposed to be paying for this stuff. Okay, so we can do that on a regular basis. Okay, so that's one of the practices that we can do. Let's look here. The next one there is standards for financial program management. There are a number of standards that are published in relation to these guidelines. And in many cases, what OMB has done is come up with a side-by-side thing. And on one side they have, on one side, yeah, I feel yeah, I look like a rock star. Yeah, on one side they have over here what you're supposed to do, and on the other side what you used to do. You know, this is going to be the new, this is going to be the old. And then I suggest you put what we're currently doing, unless you're already doing basically what we're supposed to be doing right now. And look at the two and see how are they different and adjust for the differences. So if you're already documented to that stage, I think it's just going to be a little tweak here and there, some fine tuning. I don't think it's going to be as fearsome as people are leading people to believe. Okay? Remember I said that's one of my objectives. It depends on where you are right now. Now, if you have never even dreamed of having a documentation on your procedures, you got a lot of work to do, and you ought to be scared. In fact, you probably ought to dust off your resume and see if you can find another job before they get rid of you and replace you with somebody else that can do that. Now, but there's an easier solution. You remember I told you that Becky Estrada from Lackland ISD, she has some models there, so you can take her models, put them side by side, and I think you're going to find out that her models are compatible right down the line with the new supercircular things. She's worked to design them that way. So if they're compatible, then all you need to do, if you don't have anything at all, is use that as a starting point. And she said she'd be happy for you to do that. And there are places in this template where you just put in, Bruce Cogger's going to be responsible for bank statement reconciliation. And Billy Smith is going to be responsible for checking the payroll guidelines and stuff. So you put those down and you stick names in there. Now, her suggestion, and I concur with this, is don't put a name in there. Instead, put a job title. The title of the person that's responsible for that. And concurrently now, go over to your human resource file and update the job description for whoever you're currently having do that. Okay, so you put down the bank statement reconciler, and then over in my job title, you say reconcile bank statements, weekly, monthly, daily, whatever. And you can bring those up to date. So we have a good starting point. I told Becky that I was going to promote her material, and she said that's fine. She didn't object to that at all. And I said, can you make it available in some format where we can download? And she said she's going to work on that and look into it. Because when she prepared the materials, she also prepared them for presentations from TASBO, and TASBO has a copyright on it. And if TASBO objects to it, then all bets are off. But I don't think TASBO is going to object, right? You are new officers. Y'all aren't going to object, right? But you're the Gulf Coast officers, right? Good morning, Gulf Coast. So, you might have something to try to help us get those as they're needed. How many of you have a good, strong set of written policies for virtually every job that you have done at the district right now? Okay, so we've got work to do, and we can kind of clean that up. Okay? Well, now then, let's go on. There are other things here like property standards and stuff like that. Don't lose major assets. Don't capitalize non-major assets, minor, little bitty assets. But do record them and have them. So like this computer right here, it would not be a capital asset, but it better be on an asset inventory someplace, so that if somebody comes along and they say, where did this come from? I can say that it's a part of the Title I grant. Well, gee, you're not using it in Title I. No, when Title I didn't need it anymore, they put it up as a surplus item, and no one wanted it, and so we just brought it over into this program. How did you do that? Well, we transferred it at market value. What was the market value of a 10-year-old computer? Zip. Okay, we agree. So you go through with some documentation like that, some rules, and make sure that we follow those. Okay, performance and financial monitoring, reporting. The monitoring there is going to be significant. I don't remember major changes there from what we're currently doing. Okay, record retention, again, those don't change significantly. So let me go on down. Actually, what I want to do right now is go back to the slides, because we're on page 12 there, but here's kind of a summary of what it does. We have the policy guide in section, this, by the way, is a part of a law. The subparts here have numbers, and the 200 means it's subsection, it's section B. And actually it's part 2 of that particular law. And we're going to go on down, you'll see all of them start out with a 200. But what's really crucial is the next step, right after the decimal point, the 400, 401, 407, etc. Those are numbering things. And what you're going to find out is when we get to the auditing part, they're all going to be numbered 500. Okay, so notice we also get down here, we have cost accounting standards. This is the cost principles in section B. So all of A87 now is going to be merged into this area right here. And you remember in A87 there's a section where it defines a whole bunch of costs. I haven't counted them, but I'm going to guess there are probably 200 different items in there where it says you can do this and you can't do this. You can do this with special permission, etc. So for instance, you cannot buy alcohol with federal funds. Okay, period. You just simply can't do it. Well, we had a discussion about that last year. We said, can you buy alcohol? And the answer is, well, yeah, that can be done, but not with federal funds. Okay, so, okay, can it be done with local funds? That's your local policy. And if your local policy says no, then you can't buy alcohol, period. So there will be this different level. There's federal guidelines, state guidelines, and local guidelines. And we need to make sure that we're in compliance with the most restrictive of those guidelines. Okay? For the most restrictive. And right now we're talking primarily about the costs that are involved in a federal program. Did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. You're just waving at me. You got a cramp in your arm. Okay, well, so these guidelines, these rules for cost accounting are right up here. How you account for property and so forth. How do you usually depreciate your capital assets? There's no specified way to do it. I'm going to guess y'all use straight line. How do you choose the useful life of your capital assets? The controller has a list, and some you can do that. Or, you know, I would support the idea of picking out what you think is really going to happen. What's going to happen with assets in Baytown will be quite different from what happens with assets in Dumas, just because of the humidity and the salt air and the tornadoes and the dust. And they're just different ways. So you can pick different ways to do the depreciation there. But what I think is a whole lot more significant with respect to capital assets, especially buildings, is what happens with the technology that's put into the building. How many of your buildings have fiber optic wiring in them? Did they come with that, or did you have to remodel for it? If it's a brand new building, they came with it, right? If it's an old building, you're going to have to remodel for it. So if we have an old building and we're moving into the technology age where fiber optic activity is going to be very important, what we need to do is maybe change our depreciation schedule. Can you change your depreciation schedule? Sure, yeah. You can even do that for the Internal Revenue Service, can't you? That we're not fixed on one, we can make modifications there. Well, you know, the other question that always comes up in governmental is, who cares about depreciation anyway? You know, it doesn't change your tax picture, it doesn't change your cost, and especially in fund balance, it has no impact on fund balance, right? Because we don't book that kind of expense in the places where we book expenditures. See, depreciation is not an expenditure, it's an expense, but it's not an expenditure. It's not an outflow of current financial resources. We're not going to be booking it in our fund level, our governmental fund level financial statements. We will book it in the government-wide. Or if we have proprietary funds. How many of you have proprietary funds at your district? Probably everybody. Even if you're a fairly small district, don't you generally book your workman's comp in a proprietary type fund, an internal service fund? So I imagine most of you have that. Well, what assets do you have in your workman's comp that you need to depreciate? None. So that never comes in there. But Do any of you have capital assets that are in an enterprise type fund? Do y'all have that in Houston? Okay, I know there are several schools, not many, but a few schools do have that. I would say probably about 50 of the 1,000 school districts in Texas have an enterprise fund. And most of the time, those enterprise funds are cafeteria type funds. Out in West Texas right now, there are some school districts that are setting up enterprise funds that deal with the wind generation of electricity and some other things like that. So if you have an enterprise fund, then that depreciation schedule, you can pick whichever one is appropriate for the way that you need to measure the results and operations for your enterprise fund. Okay, well, you can see that we have several things here, and basically we get down here and we have the accounting standard and disclosure statement, where it tells how we've done different things, and we need to make sure that we document the processes that we follow there. In some cases, the federal government gives you a choice. You can do it this way or you can do it that way. We can use some of the digits or we can use straight line. Which one are you going to use? Straight line is so easy. Would you use some of your digits or double finding balance or anything like that? No, whatever. Or especially scientific depreciation, who would ever do that? It's just, we don't need that kind of extra information. But if you do, well, you can do that. You're allowed to do it. So let's go in. By the way, notice down here I have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because this one goes on there just a whole bunch. And when you go back to that table of contents that we looked at a while ago, when you get the one in the official guide that comes with the Federal Register, the official guide has 28 pages of table of contents. 28 pages of contents, and it's a huge thing. The whole thing is about right at 300 pages long. The 28 pages just tell you how they got that organized. All right, let's go over to the next one, audit. And this is the one that we'll talk about now. I guess probably, I think we're probably supposed to end somewhere around 10 o'clock, is that right? Okay, so about the next 12 minutes, we're going to talk about auditing. Actually, I think probably about the next 5 or 7 minutes, we'll talk about auditing, and that will leave 7 or 5 minutes for questions. So don't hold back. If you have questions, let's have it. All right, so this is organized almost exactly like A133. Well, no, I'm going to say it's organized exactly like A133. When you go to that side-by-side that I talked about, you go down and you'll see that they're virtually identical. Almost the very same order, the very same organization for it. It's almost identical. There will be some places where there are some subtle differences. And while they're subtle, I want to say they're also very important. And that's the ones that I think are most important. There are two of them. One of them is in the area of how you calculate a major fund when there is a major program, when there's one program that overweighs all the others. And I'll talk about that. Schools aren't going to have that. Colleges do. But when I tell you what it is, you'll say, yeah, we agree, that's not going to be there. So in general, it's not going to be something that's going to have an impact on you all, I don't think. But we'll at least talk about it and see what kind of impact it might have. That way, if it does come up, then you're ready for it, you know what to do with it. The other place that I think is a subtle change, and I'm actually going to read some of these to you because I want to make sure that we look at them definitely. In the area of determining risk for a program and the risk assessment for the auditee, whether you're low risk or not low risk for the auditee, the methods for doing that have become more stringent. They're not terribly different, but we don't have as much judgment as we used to have. So the independent auditor, when they find a certain situation, that just removes the risk condition. It removes the low risk position that you may have had in the past because you violated some things, and the auditor doesn't have the ability to say, well, I'm not going to consider that, I don't think it's big enough anyway. But from what I've observed on financial statements that are submitted to TEA, almost none of y'all are going to have to worry about this because almost all the time you don't have any significant findings that would involve a change in your risk status. So again, we're going to get into some details there. That's the other part of my idea that I hope I can alleviate some of your concerns that you might have had. Have any of y'all heard about the super circular before today, before coming to this one? Or the Omni circular? You haven't? Oh, good, well then you weren't afraid anyway. Okay, well, sleep easy tonight, and tomorrow when somebody tells you nasty things, and you can say, well, Bruce doesn't think it's going to be that bad. And I really don't. Okay, so first thing it talks about purpose. Well, the purpose is the same thing. It's been almost no change there. Audit requirements are virtually the same too. A slightly different condition that relates to a program audit as opposed to a single audit. You know, we can elect to have a program audit for one particular program, and there's a slight change there, but I don't imagine most of y'all ever do that, right? If you're hit for a single audit, your auditor comes in and says, you have spent more than $500,000 this year, therefore we have to do a single audit act audit, and here's the way it's going to be done. And you say, okay, you know, that's right. Is that correct? Or do you ever say, no, auditor, you're full of balloons? It's not that way at all. We don't have to do that. We want to have a program audit. I guess the next question is, have you ever heard of a program audit? Okay, good. See, I was right. We don't need to worry about that. There's a change that you don't need to be worried about changing. 502, basis for determining federal awards expended. Well, part of what is happening here is if you have lots of commitments that can involve some federal guarantees, then you need to include in that the guarantees from the federal award. So most of y'all get commodities, right, in your food service program. Do all of you get commodities? Everybody gets commodities? Okay, so everyone gets commodities. That would be one of these things that would have to enter into it. The fair value of the commodities. Where do you get the fair value of the commodities? Department of Agriculture sends you a statement on that, right? And so it's not something we have to search for, but that would be included now when we prepare our schedule of expenditures of federal awards. We're going to come back to that particular schedule in just a minute and talk about it. So we would include that in food service. The other things that might appear here, and this is the one that I was talking about, could be a major program that may throw things out of whack for you. Colleges and universities very often have student loan programs that are federally funded. If they have a student loan program that's federally funded, in many cases it's huge. It's just a huge program. So for example, they may have $40 million committed in a student loan program, and they have relatively small programs otherwise. So let's say that they have $40 million student loan program and 10 $1,000 other kind of, 10 $1 million other programs. So we have a total of $50 million outstanding. Well, when we do the major program selection after a while, you're going to find out that the $40 million would be a major program, and none of the rest would. Okay, none of the rest would be a type A program. And if we have to audit the $40 million, we wouldn't audit any of the others. Well, that's not what we're trying to do. We don't want to get rid of other programs just so we don't have to audit those. But that's what would happen if we had a huge program like that overshadowing the others. And so the rule now is you take that $40 million program and, okay, it's a type A, we've got to audit it, you set it over at the side, and then you perform the rest of the procedures on what's left. And once you get through with that, in this case, the one I just outlined for you, all of your 10 $1 million programs would be type A programs. And so if they're a type A program and they're not low risk, they have to be audited as a major program. So you see the difference there. And that was a significant change between our new items in the old A133. Now they were doing this new part even through A133 just by particular demand. It was an official statement from OMB to change the way you did your analysis of major programs. About 2 years ago they started doing that. And so we've been doing it in some cases. But none of y'all have anything like one single program that outweighs all the rest of them, do you? See, that'll happen in a university. That may happen in a county program where they have land banks. It may happen in a city where they have some loan guarantees for housing or new programs. It could happen in other areas, but it just doesn't happen in independent school districts in Texas. So we don't need to worry very much about that basis for determining that. Relation to other audit requirements, well, we have to do a single audit act audit, but that needs to fit in with a Yellow Book audit, which needs to fit in with a Joint Accepted Auditing Procedures audit from AICPA guidelines. So those are all going in. If we want to, we can have an international auditing standards audit instead of a instead of a generally accepted auditing standards from AICPA. We can use the international. No one's doing that right now, but that can be substituted. And they just go through some things there. There aren't big changes. Frequency of audits at least once a year, unless the provisions of the state say once every other year. And if it does say once every other year, then it has some changes over what can be measured and what can be low risk and stuff like that. We don't do that. In Texas, you have to have an audit every year for an independent school district or charter school or other kinds of school operations. Sanctions, if we have committed some errors or mistakes or fraud or anything like that, then there are some specific sanctions that can be brought against us, which ordinarily involve withholding funds. Occasionally they can involve fines and stuff like that, but those are discussed there. Audit costs are incurred by the auditee, and y'all already know that, don't you? So you pay those program audits. Program-specific audits, it goes through what you have to do for those, the guidelines. Auditee responsibilities. Okay, this really is the one that affects you all the most. You're responsible for preparing the entire financial statements. Okay, you're also responsible. Now that doesn't mean you have to do them. So do any of you all have your independent auditors prepare the financial statements for you? Some people do, I know. And you don't have to shake your head big. This is not the confession. So if your independent auditor prepares the government-wide stuff, sometimes they do that, or do they do the basic financial statement? Well, whoever's preparing your financial statements for you, they're your responsibility. And the guidelines for them to be independent require that you take responsibility in writing for those, and more importantly, they require that you know enough about what's being done in the audit that you are qualified to accept responsibility for them. Okay? When I go to the insurance company, I say, what should I do? And they say, well, you ought to have this kind of coverage, that kind of coverage. I don't know enough about insurance to know whether I should or I shouldn't. And so I trust my insurance agent, and I buy what my insurance agent says. A lot of people do that. Y'all may be different in that, but what I can't do is do that with my audit. I have to know what has going on, and I need to know a couple things. That has been the source of a special program that we offer, that EDMIS offers to people. We have one called the District's Responsibility for Preparing the Annual Financial Report. And we go through the different things that you have to know that happen so that you can accept responsibility for the reports. But it doesn't say you have to do them. It has a checklist that shows that they were done correctly because this number should equal this number, and it does. This number should equal this number, and it does. This number should not equal this number, and it doesn't. So when you go through that checklist and you go through, you say, okay, everything checks out here, therefore I think the financial statements have been prepared correctly, and I will accept responsibility for it. Okay? Well, then the next thing we do, the auditor selection. A comment was made in Austin that is going to have to be done by competitive bid. And I said, I didn't think you could bid professional services in Texas, like auditing, law firms, engineering, architecture, some of those where we have licensed professionals doing them. And so they said, no, you're going to have to bid that. Well, I went out and I looked up the law, and indeed, I'm right. You cannot bid. It gives you the competitive bidding law, and it says exempted from this are, and it lists the ones that I just mentioned. Auditing, legal services, etc. Those are exempted from it. So you don't have to bid that. In fact, in Texas, you probably can't bid that. Now, you can ask for a competitive request for proposals. You can ask the people to provide those, but they won't be bidding. And they can't give you a fixed bid. We'll do this for $40,000, period. We don't care what it costs us, that's what we're going to do it for. They can't do that. It has to be related to the effort that they have. It also can't be done on what they find. If we find some things, we're going to cover them up for you, but that'll be an extra 10 grand. You know, so we can't do that kind of thing. Even though the other reports said that competitive bidding will be done for audit services for everything was basically the comment. But it can't be done for selected things. You all will do the financial statements, we already said that. And then if there are findings, you will need to do some follow-up on those. And one of the things that's new in here is the timeliness of your follow-up. As soon as you get that audit report, you start following up on the findings. So I found that a school district had a targeted assistance program instead of school-wide, and they did not have sufficient controls over identifying the children that participated in the targeted assistance program. That's my finding. And so you read that and you say, well, okay, what do we need to do? Well, here are the guidelines for who gets to qualify in a targeted assistance program. So you need to make sure that they meet these guidelines. Well, our low income percentage at that school district is 45%. We could go school-wide, we wouldn't have to do that, right? That's right. Okay, next year we're gonna go school-wide. That's your fix. But if that was a material misstatement this year, if it was a material weakness, in the past I could say, okay, they changed that, so I'm not going to say they're no longer a low-risk audit team. I had the finding, it counts, that takes you out of the low-risk audit team category. Okay? That's one of the new guidelines. But in the past, I was able to say, okay, that's not a relevant finding anymore. It's been, the conditions have changed, it's not relevant anymore. And so that, for 2 years now, you could not be a low-risk auditee because you have to have, without a material weakness in your internal controls, you have to have no material weaknesses for 2 years. But that part's changed. So the next thing that we have, gee, I'm going over a little bit. Is it okay if I keep going just for a little while? Okay. So that will allow us on the finding follow-up. You all have to do that. You have to submit the report. You still do that. You already do that, right? Now, how many of y'all did the audit data feed with the new, what were those things called? The finalization procedures last year? Isn't that what you had to do? You got your audit data feed, and then you had to compare it to your PDF file. And if there were differences, you had to resolve those differences before you fed that into the system. Okay, was that hard? No, not after we knew what we had to do. But before you knew what you had to do, if you read their initial instructions and thought, what in the hell is this? You know, because it was really a mess. And so you just couldn't figure out anything there. Well, we now can do those. All the other report filing, that's pretty easy, isn't it? We can all file a PDF report. And then, of course, that data feed to the Department of the Bureau of Census that we have to do, the data form. Okay, so those are your responsibilities. Now, I'm going to skip over some of these other things because I want to go to the process of determining a major program because that's a very significant thing. And that's also where most of our thresholds have changed. So let's go look at the changes in thresholds here. Well, I think we're going to get them. Yeah, here they are. We've changed thresholds now. You had to have an audit, a single audit act audit this year if you had expended more than $500,000. That's going up to $750,000. None of y'all are affected by that, right? You had $500,000, more than $500,000 this year. You still have more than $750,000, so you still have to have a single audit act audit. So that one didn't have an effect on most of you all. The cutoff between Type A and Type B programs used to be $300,000. That has changed now, and that cutoff is going to be a moving cutoff. It's going to be 3% of that $750,000. I'm sorry, it's going to be $750,000 or 3% of your total financial assistance, whichever is largest. So, how many of y'all have, just one program where you've spent more than $750,000? Any of you in that category? A few of you? Okay, if you have just one program, where that's your Type A program. None of the rest of your programs are Type A. So there's a rule that we're going to use our Type A programs if they're not low risk. If they are low risk, if we audited it last year and we didn't have any findings, it's a low risk program. So now then we go pick up our Type B programs, and if we can't get enough Type B programs to get us up to 20% of our total federal financial assistance, we go back and re-audit that Type A program that we audited last year. Okay, so we might get into, for some, I'd say small but not tiny school district, we get into a loop here where we're doing the same program year in and year out because they only have one. Now, most people will have at least 3 programs, especially at Title I and food service. Most of them have that for their programs. And so we'll still be doing those. Minimum expenditures for a program would be high risk and type B. Now this is a change again. Again, we've moved the threshold up, so it's going to be 25% of that 750,000. We have 750,000 is our cutoff up here. See this cutoff right here? 3% of that, I'm sorry, 25% of that is 187,500. So now for a program to be a high-risk type B program, we have to have at least $750,000 of expenditures in that program. I'm sorry, at least $187,500 in that program. If it doesn't, then it can't qualify as a high-risk type B. So if in the past you have had them cutting off at 100,000, maybe you had 125,000 in the program, and that was your high-risk type B, that would not be high risk anymore. The only time that would come in is if you needed it for your percentage of coverage. Okay, and so that went up from the 100,000. We will report known or likely question cost of 25,000. That went up from 10,000. I find this one kind of funny because if it is known, it's likely, right? Why don't they just say if likely question costs are 25,000, then you report it. If they say known or likely, well, okay, that's like saying if it's colorful or blue, then it would be reported. And so it's kind of redundant there. Coverage went from 50% to 40% for if you're a non-low risk auditee. Now we only need to cover 40%. If you're a low risk auditee, we need to cover 20%. And now, you remember we said this one earlier, 1 type B for every 4 type A programs. And so that's going to be a significant reduction in the number of programs you have. Now, thinking about your work right now, can you tell me what will be your major programs next year? How many programs do you have where you have more than 750,000 expended in them? Okay, now in Houston it'll be different because we raised yours. We took that 47,500, multiplied it by 3%, and then that became our new change there. But, so if you're a smaller district, if you have programs that have 750,000, then they're going to be type A programs. Did you have any findings? Were they audited last year or the year before as a major program? Okay, if they weren't, they are a major program. Check it off. If they were, then they may not be. Was there any finding on them last year or the year before? If there was, they're going to be a major program. If there wasn't, they're a low-risk program, and you don't have to include them as a major program, unless we don't have enough major programs to cover the 40% or 20% of our audit activity. Okay? So you can sit down right now. You haven't even started to think about how much you've spent in them, but you know how much you're going to spend because you budgeted for them, right? And you usually don't deviate from that budget by any huge amount. So you can tell exactly what the auditors are going to be looking at for their programs right at this point. Okay, let's go. Now, the risk items are in your handout. They're back on pages 16 and 17 for a program, and on 17 and 18 for the low-risk auditee categories. I'm quite a bit over right now, so I'm not going to go to those. I'm going to let you all go read those, but what you'll find out, as I said earlier, is there's just no room for me to have any judgment. I can't say, well, I had a finding there last year, but it really wasn't an important finding, so I'm going to discard it, and I'll still call this a low-risk program. I can't do that anymore. There's a yes, no, black, white. Now, I promise you that's going to change. Okay, just knowing what I know about the way those things are going to get done, somewhere along the way, somebody's going to say, well, that's just too rigorous. You know, that's kind of like our 3 strikes and you're out, you go to jail for the rest of your life. If you get caught with 3 parking tickets, you go to jail for the rest of your life. You know, no, we can't do that. So somewhere along the way, somebody's going to change that. It might be 4 or 5 years from now, but I guarantee you that's going to change. It's just too rigorous. Besides that, it takes the judgment away from the profession where they keep saying, use professional judgment. Well, I can't. You've boxed me in. But use it anyways. Why? That'll get me in trouble. See, that's going to go away. Okay, well, now we are ready to do 67 and 68 and 71, but we're going to take a 5-minute break. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll get back to this in just a second. Do you all remember what my main theme was for today? You remember what the main theme was that I wanted to do today? What? Keep you from being afraid of what's coming. Yeah, that's. Now, how many of you have heard really, really nasty things about the GASB 68 and the impact on your financial statements? That's the new retirement material for your TRS. Have y'all been hearing bad things about that? Yeah, like it's going to add an unfunded liability to your financial statements. That's a whopper. Yeah, a huge amount there. Well, that may be true. That may be true, but it also may not be true. And what we're going to do here is talk about some of the things. And then I'd like for you to put in perspective what we're talking about. And I'm going to give you a location on the internet where TRS last year they took last year's data and they used it in their GASB 68 model. And GASB 68, Government Accounting Standard Board, statement number 68, tells them how they're going to divvy up the unfunded liability for the state with all the school districts. So it'll be your share of the unfunded liability. And so they did this experiment. We've never done this before, so this is brand new. But they divvied it all up, and they have it published. I'll show you in a little bit on the internet exactly where you can find this information for your school district. They have all, whatever it is, I think it's 1,027 school districts or something like that, plus all of the charter schools, plus the education service centers, plus, all the other things. Anyone that's involved in this TRS stuff. They did the analysis for every one of us, and you can go out and see what your share of the 2013 operations would have been if they had been implementing GASB 68 in 2013. And then what I want you to do, and please do this is your homework assignment, just to either cause you to say, hey, I got to retire before we really get trapped on this one, or I'm happy to know that we don't have quite as big a problem as we thought we would. Get that number, that liability from TRS, and compare it to your bonded debt, your current level of bonded debt. Okay? And see where you stand. Now, I've done this with some school districts. One of them was Tyler. Tyler ISD, it turned out that their unfunded, their share of the unfunded liability, as I recall, it was about $40 million. That sounds like a hell of a lot of money, doesn't it? $40 million for Tyler. They're not that big. They're not tiny, but they're not gigantic either. But $40 million sounded like quite a bit. But they had $300 million worth of bonded debt outstanding. Okay, and once a year they have to write out a check to pay some of that bonded debt. And eventually they have to pay it all off. And so, but they are collecting taxes for it, so they're able to pay it. Well, for them also, they have to pay into TRS a certain amount every year. And then their retired employees get a certain amount drawn out every year. The money's coming in from the state and from the employees, it's being withheld and then sent to TRS. And so when you compare that unfunded liability of $40 million with a $300 million bonded debt, to me, it did not seem to be just frightfully out of line. So I'd like for you all to do that yourselves and just see where you stand. Now, I'm not going to give any advice to you about what to do, like prepare to change careers or anything like that. But if you do find that it's enormous, then what you might do is think about how things can happen at your district that can adjust for that. And I'm not sure anything can be done. It's basically a state provision. The way they withhold money and it gets sent to TRS itself. So now what I want us to do is talk about GASB 67. That's the Government Accounting Standard Board pronouncement that deals with how the plan must account for and report the obligations of the plan. For us, if you have any kind of fiduciary type funds, like a scholarship fund, many of y'all have some scholarship funds, a student scholarship fund. If you have something like that, what TRS 67 requires, I'm sorry, what GASB 67 requires TRS to do is something exactly like what you do with your scholarship funds. They're going to have two financial statements, and what, of course, is different is how you figure out how much money goes into your plan and how they figure out how much money goes into their plan and what the obligations are for going out. But the accounting for it is just basically the very same thing. So it's not an invented new system for it. It's just that now GASB has said we need to be more specific about exactly how these things are measured and reported. You know, in accounting, if you go back to the very, very basic theory of accounting, there are three major things that you do in accounting. The first thing is you identify the nature of whatever has happened. You know, was it an expenditure? Was it revenue? Was it a loss? Catastrophic loss or windfall revenue? You identify the basic nature of it. And then the next thing that you have to do is figure out how you're going to measure it. What is the measurement of a loss from a hurricane coming through Houston? Well, we have all kinds of ways we measure it, and you can get information from various agencies about what the loss was. But the real loss that applies to me is what it did to my roof, or what it did to my car, or something like that. So, yeah, how you measure the loss, the accounting is what was it, how's it measured? The third thing is how does it get reported? So now with our retirement thing, the first thing is, what is it? Is this an obligation? Is it a liability? Is it a deferred resource inflow or outflow? Is it an asset? What do we have here? How do we measure it? And most of the time, the way we measure it is going to involve net present value calculations, because that's what actuaries do. So we're going to use an actuarial cost method for a lot of things. So we'll measure that. And now what we're into here is, how do we report it? TRS has the problem of identifying and measuring it, and then they report it. And a part of their report comes to us, and then we have to report our obligation under what's happened for them. Now, the nice thing for you all is you don't need to worry about the measurement or the identification, because there's no way in the world you can do that. There's no way in the world that you know the retirement obligations that were imposed on TRS because a teacher worked at your district and retired. Because that teacher may have worked at your district, and another district, and another district, and another district, and an education service center, and TEA, and then they retired. See, if they worked through a whole bunch of things like that, and now your district is not responsible for any particular part of that, they're just responsible while that employee was working for you for making the contribution into the system. That's the only responsibility that your district has for that. But then when it's time for people to retire, the total obligation of the system has to be borne by the people that participate in it, of which you are one. And so as the percentage of your participation gets measured, again, that becomes a measurement issue, and TRS is elected to essentially measure that in proportion to your contribution to the program. So your yearly contribution, you put up so many $1 million, your share of that unfunded debt will be that $1 million as a percent of all the billions of dollars put in by all the districts in Texas, and that will be your share. So for a school district like Houston, I think your share is going to be less than 1%. Because of all the others. Now that's the big one. So what's going to be the percent for a very, very small school district? Well, probably less than 0.0001%, you know. It will be a relatively small percent of what goes in there. And that table that I'm telling you about that you can get from TRS gives you all of that. You can pick that information up. So here's our problem. One of the things we have to do, first of all, is figure out what kind of trust we have here with this retirement system. And that's definitely put forward. I'm going to look at two other kinds of trusts, partly to throw them out because they don't apply to us, but also partly to say, if we had that trust, here's what we would be reporting. That's either a lot easier or a lot more difficult than since we have the other kind of trust we have to do. In general, the type of trust that TRS is a lot easier to report than the other programs that we might have. Okay? Then we're going to talk about the reports, and there's something that's brand new now with GASB 68 that we've never done before, and that is we're going to include a comment in our required supplementary information. In RSI, we're going to have some disclosures about our share, our proportionate share of the unfunded liability. Now, in the past, there have only been 4 items that went into RSI. One of the items, only 4 that could go in there. One of the items is your share, is the retirement program that you have, or the retirement program. If we operate the plan, we'd have to have RSI there. But now see, we're adding another part to that and saying, if we participate in the plan, we're going to add a little bit there. That's what we're talking about here. The other thing is, if you operate an investment trust program where you make investments, but you also have investments from other people that participate in this investment trust. We don't do that. That is done usually by Texpool and Lone Star, right? They're the ones that do most of the investments for schools in Texas. Okay, does anybody here have an investment where they do investments for other people, other school districts or counties or something like that? Yeah, we just don't do that in Texas. The third thing is, if you have infrastructure assets that you account for using the modified approach. Well, TA was really wonderful for us. That came out of GASB 34. Y'all remember that one, GASB 34? About a decade and a half ago, when everybody said, oh God, 34, what are we going to do with that? And one of the things that was a big problem was we're going to have to depreciate capital assets. Well, what's the easiest thing you've ever done related to GASB 34? Depreciate capital assets, right? And many people thought that was a nightmare, but that was the easiest thing we had to do. Okay, but at any rate, if you used the modified approach, you didn't have to depreciate. It's just that you had to estimate each year what the maintenance was, what maintenance was required on your capital assets to keep them operating if they were infrastructure, like bridges and storm sewers and stuff like that. Well, TA was really good for us because they said, we want you to define the facilities around a campus as a part of that campus. So if you have a football field, we have lights at the football field. Those are not infrastructure, they're part of the football field. If you have a parking lot, that's not infrastructure, that's part of the football field. So they said just define them. So now those are all part of the capital asset because usually they're built at the same time or repaired at the same time. So TA said that, and that alleviated this problem of figuring out the maintenance part. Most cities and counties can't do that because they have lots of things like storm sewers and bridges and roadways and culverts and stuff like that, street lights. So most of the time, cities and counties can't do what TA said school districts could do. Okay, so out of the 3 that I named so far, we didn't have any. The only one that we had RSI on was the budget comparison for the general fund and each major special revenue fund with a legally adopted budget. And we don't have any of those. Now, what special revenue funds do we have that have a legally adopted budget? Food service. Is it ever major? In all my years of working with this, I have never found any federally funded program to be major. Under a major fund. Now, major program, you always find them all the time. Major fund, no. Remember that major fund is the 10 and 5? Or I used to call it the 10 and 5 in the Who Cares test. If somebody cares enough to make a major fund, then it passes the major fund criteria. But most of the time, they say, hey, let's make that a major fund. You say, well, your audit fee goes up by 15%. They say, let's don't make that a major fund. So we didn't care that much. We care a lot about it, but we don't care that much. Okay, so the 10 and 5 is almost always the one that applies, and I've never found the food service or Title I or special ed or any other fund to be a major fund in the 10 and 5 rules. The feds just don't give us enough money for it to be there. Okay, so now we're going to add something. We're going to add RSI here. That's something we've never done before. So we have to figure out exactly what we're adding there, and we're going to do that. And then we're going to talk about the accounting. And how do you all currently account for what you put in for TRS? You debit expenditures, retirement plan, and you credit revenues on behalf of revenues from TRS, right? In kind of a nutshell, you do a lot more than that. That's all you're going to do in the future. That's all it's going to take, the same thing. So we don't really change much there. But now, where are you going to get the numbers for that? There's only one place in the entire world where you can get those numbers, that's TRS. They have access to all the data that you need in order to be able to calculate your share, and they'll let you have those numbers, but you don't want them. It's a gigantic database, and you don't want to get into that. So you take their numbers. Now, boy, that's asking you to be very trusting, isn't it? That's really asking for a lot of trust. And so Gatsby said, if you don't trust them enough, then you can ask for some reports. So we're going to talk about some of those. And AICPA said, in the process of auditing, they don't trust you either. Okay, so what you have to do is send assurances to TRS that the census data that you have with your employees is valid census data. That's the important part for you. And so you're probably doing that right now. How many of you that have just finished your audit or are in the process of finishing an audit? Okay, then you're right now in the middle of that process of getting your information to TRS, and hopefully your auditors have taken a look at how you've accumulated the information. They don't look at everything, they just look at a sample, and but that's probably been done. They generally take a look at some of the stuff from your human resource data anyway, don't they? So now since they're doing that, they probably just added a few things to check off for TRS. If they had to add some, they may have already had them in place. So let's go to the next slide. The system that we have in Texas is a defined benefit pension plan. That means we tell you when you retire, we will pay you X dollars a month for the rest of your life. And in some circumstances, there can be some cost of living adjustments, which are usually up. And if there are changes in the plan, it could mean you get more. I've been hearing that there are some states that are wanting to cut the benefits that they're paying their retirees. Now I ask you, do governmental employees get paid such a high salary that there's a whole lot of demand for people to go work for governments? No. So if we start cutting benefits for them, is that going to make them more attractive jobs for them, for people to pursue? No, that can't happen. That's a good way to ensure that we don't have people working in the business that we really need to have working in the business. So anyway, it's a defined benefit pension plan, and we'll end up with a net pension liability, a fiduciary net pension. I shouldn't say a fiduciary. We'll end up with a fiduciary net position. There may be a net position that has a pension liability, or it may be positive. Okay? And then so one of the statements we'll prepare is that fiduciary net position. The next one is changes in fiduciary net position. And then we're going to talk about some audit concerns here, what you need to make sure you're doing so that you're covered for this. So here are the financial statements. The fiduciary net position, assets, deferred outflows, liabilities, deferred inflows, and fiduciary net position. That's exactly what you're doing with your scholarship funds in it, your private purpose trust funds for students. Do you remember if it is or not? I'm not getting much response here. Do you do any of those? Do y'all have any scholarship fund? That's what you do, isn't it? Okay, then let's look at the next one. Changes in fiduciary net position. What came in, what went out. That, starting with what we had at the beginning, that gives us our new net position, or our change in net position. Okay, so those are the financial statements, and they will be audited just like the information that gets audited for your student activity funds, your student scholarship funds. But now, this audit is not going to be of you. This audit is going to be TRS. So one of the concerns was, is TRS going to be audited in time for the information that goes into their report to be fed back to us so it can go into our report appropriately? And the answer to that is yes, because we've delayed our report 1 year. So what gets audited for 2014 for TRS is going to be the basis for the data that goes into our report for 2015. And you should get an audited report from TRS somewhere in February. That's their goal right now, to give you that report in February. So you get this audited report from TRS in February, and that's going to show you all the things that we just talked about, your pension liability, the amount of money you paid in, etc. All of those are going to come in at that time. And then that'll be included in your report in next year for 2015. So if you're a June 30 year in, it'll be included in that report. If you're August 31 year in, it'll be in in that report. But all the data comes from August 31, 2014. All the data that's in your report at that time. Because it doesn't make sense for us to try to hurry that up. There's no way TRS can get that information to you in time for it to be in there. And GASB knew that, and so they said there should be a year's delay. They even allow for a 30-month delay on some cases, but they do allow for a 1-year delay. So throughout the nation, it's going to be a 1-year delay. And so now, if we look at the auditor's responsibilities, well, this is for the plans auditor. Can you all read that where you are? Okay. If you can't, you have it on your iPad thing, so you can look at it there. I have in red now here a part that's very important. So what happens is the plans auditor needs to come out and look at the way you all keep your records to make sure that the data that's coming into them is valid for them to estimate what's going on for them. So they can do the actuarial cost study that says this is how much we have to pay out because of people retiring, this is how much we need to charge them because of their participation in the plan. For them to do that work, they have to have your census data. And so now since TRS is not big enough to do that, they're not big enough to come out and audit your facilities, what they will probably do is they will send a team out to audit a few particularly large or risky school districts. Houston, you're probably on the griddle for that since you're the largest in the state. What are you, the second largest in the world or something like that? You're just too damn big, right? So they're going to be, they're probably going to look for you. They have, okay, all right. So you all get that, and then we have the, if they don't come out to audit you, so Baytown, where's Baytown? They'll probably send a letter to your auditor and say, you need to do an agreed upon procedure engagement to check these. Now, they're going to do those agreed upon procedure engagements probably once every 3 or 4 years. It's not specified yet exactly. Have they done that with you all? Okay, that's going to be a sampling around the state, probably. Now, do we have anyone here from Tatum? Don't worry about it, Tatum. You get a free ride because you're so small, no one cares anyway. Okay? Because it doesn't matter what you do. If you did everything absolutely wrong, it would not blip the needle in Texas retirement system 1 iota. So why should we worry about spending resources to come out and check how you've accounted for your 13 employees? Okay? So you see, there's this process where we're getting through all of this. So it refers here to AT section 101. That's the agreed upon procedure. Now, let me go back to that one just for a minute, because again, I had a discussion with somebody the other day that said the agreed upon procedures is between the school district and the auditor, whoever's going to do the audit. No, somebody said the school district's not doing it right. So the school district says, well, if we do this, will that make it okay? That's the agreed upon procedure. And then they agree, this is what we're going to do. And then the school district says, auditor or whoever they want to have do that, will you come and do this procedure for us and write a report that we can then send to those other people? The agreement is between the auditee and whoever they've offended. And the procedure then is done by the auditors, and the report goes to both parties so that they can decide whether or not you've met the requirements of correcting what you've been doing. That's the agreed upon part of it. Okay, now that's a very important thing because you're probably not going to get TA or TRS to come out and say, this is exactly what you have to do. They have 1,000 school districts. So they've written a general thing. And you have to make sure you're fitting into that general thing. Y'all remember Module 9 of the resource guide, the FAST track? Module 9 was the one that dealt with state compensatory education, and there was a section in there in Module 9 that dealt with agreed upon procedures for state comp ed. Well, the state said you have to do this. If you didn't have adequate expenditure of your comp ed material and your students aren't doing very well, then we want to have someone come out and tell us what you're doing with our money and what needs to be done to make you more effective. So the state told the school district, this is what you have to do if you want to get any more of our money. That was the agreement. Then the school district engaged the auditor to come in and do that study and prepare the report to send to TEA. Okay? So that's what we mean here by agreed upon procedures, and it is in section 101 of the new audit guidelines. So let's go on to the next one. The employer's auditor now, that's your auditor, needs to do the following things. They need to check your records, how you keep records related to both retirees and inactive employees. Well, you probably don't keep any records on inactive employees anymore, do you? They're inactive, they're retired, they're not in there, so we're really checking on your current employees. Those others, we've already sent all what we know about them to TRS, and now it's TRS's responsibility to keep track from there. So if I'm retired from UT El Paso, and TRS is doing the work for my retirement pay, and I die, then somebody that's involved in my operations there, probably my spouse, needs to write to TRS and say, Bruce is dead, he no longer gets it. Although don't quit sending it because I get his share now. Okay, so there's a communication of responsibility now that goes not from you, the school district, to TRS, but from your former employee to TRS, that responsibility. But if you know about it, then you probably ought to communicate to TRS and just make sure that's been done. Okay? Well, so there's a listing here of the things that you're probably supposed to do. Now, notice this thing, TRS tracks. That's where you're going to find the stuff that TRS requires the schools to do. You all already know this because you've been doing this for years. What are tracks? Remember what those are? What does that mean? TRS, retirement, activity, quota system, or something like that. It's an acronym again. Really works nicely though, right? We're keeping track of these tracks. And so it's the tracks, and you can find them at TRS's website there. And so I suggest you go look at it. Actually, again, probably the best thing for y'all to do is just go to your human resource group and say, how are we doing? You know, are y'all doing these things correctly? Because you have to be in compliance with GASB 67 and 68 now. And so they'll say, yeah, we're doing this fine. Okay, so there is a part in this one right up here that is what is tracks.pdf, and you can find out how they define that. Now let me go to the next thing because there are some more, we're going to look at some other issues that relate to tracks. Okay, the type of trust that we have. Now, we've been talking up to now about GASB 67, but now I want us to talk strictly about GASB 68. There are three types of trusts that are considered in GASB 68. One is an agent employer. One is just the employer. And then the other is a cost sharing agent employer. And that's what we are. And that's the only thing that makes sense. Now here's the difference between the three. If we are a single employer unit, that means your employees and only your employees can draw from the retirement program that you have. And now if they're no longer your employees, you probably have some rules about whether they get paid a percentage of what's going on because they used to be your employee, or if they quit, they lose it all. That kind of depends on what your vesting rules are and that type of thing. So that doesn't fit us at all. The agent trust is a system where several employers get together and they have an agent that administers their retirement plan, but only my employees can draw from my contribution to the plan. My agent has to make sure that Bill's employees don't get a share of my employees' part of the plan. So you can see that doesn't work for Texas schools either, right? Because how many of you have at least one teacher in your school district that used to work at a different school district? And all hands should go up on that. And so we couldn't do that. That's just not practical. So we're in a cost sharing program. And so people build up with TRS basically in their own file. Doesn't matter if you work for 5 different districts. You still have your file, you have your part up there, and you can withdraw from that. That's going to be your process. And it involves all those things we saw a while ago, that your age, your highest salaries, etc. All those things that you all already know are involved in. So that kind of takes care of that. So now, what financial statements and disclosures do they have? Well, we're going to look at those. Again, we're going to look at RSI, and then we're going to talk about some auditing challenges for just a minute. So Here's this location right here. See, I have the, when you get my handout material, you want to click on this one, and here's what you're going to find when you go there. This is TRS's system, and you see it talks about GASB 67, 68, and 71. Goes through some details on those. But here's what I'd like for you to make sure you scroll on down the page there until you get to this section right here. See, it says GASB fiscal year 2013 allocation. Go look at that, and this, remember this was your homework assignment. See what you would have had as an obligation this year had we been following GASB 68 in 2013. And compare that with your bonded debt. Okay, when you've done that, then you'll have all the information that I could give you here on what's going to be happening with that report. Now, where did that report come from? Well, it's data that was put into the school district, to the TRS by the school district. None of it was audited, so there's a question of how valid is the data. Well, that's what we're going to change. So now we need to go talk about the validation. But there's another thing I want to do here. I want us to go down to the bottom of the page here, the section. I had a question as to whether this was, here it is. I had a question in my mind as to whether or not we were a cost sharing with special considerations, and we're not. What that means is that somebody else is paying the tab for the Texas School District. Well, TEA sends you money, or TRS, you get it from TEA, don't you? The state sends it to TEA, TA sends it to you, you get money for my share of the retirement, your share, everybody else's share in the school district. We get that, that's the on-behalf revenue. And then we send that to TRS along with my contribution. I make a contribution, the contribution from the state goes in, and all that goes in. Now, what it looked like to me was that there was nobody involved in here except the state of Texas, because the school district did not send some money in. But there's a way that this gets severed, and we're going to look at why that is a very important thing when this relationship is severed, because if we don't sever that relationship that's just between TRS and the state, then if there's any obligation for this, it belongs to the state, not the district. But they've severed that relationship, so now there is an obligation. That's why you have to report this obligation in your GASB 34 government-wide financial statements. That's where it's going to show up. It won't show up in your fund balance. And in fact, in the process of trying to kind of alleviate fears here, what I need to show you is that your fund balance is unaffected by this in any way that has not already been affected in the past. Okay, the way we've done fund balance. Now, what does the board look at most when they get their audit report? Fund balance. So that's really not changing. But somebody's going around telling the board, we're going to have this whopping unfunded liability out there. They say, where is it? It's on your government-wide financial statements. What are those? Where do we find that? You know, it's the first thing that's in the financial statements now. A lot of boards don't know it's there. Some boards do. And they're going to be worried about that because it would be large. But as I said, if you do your homework, I think you're going to find out it's not quite as large as maybe some people are putting it out to be. Okay, because we have some time constraints, let me go back here to the slides, and we're going to pick up some other things here. What period is this from? Well, for our information for next year, it will be for August 31st, 2014. Whatever you have submitted to TRS at August 31, 2014. That will be the basis for their calculation of the amount that needs to be paid to the employees when they retire, to retirees. That will also be the amount that comes into the school district's unfunded liability. Will it be audited? Yes, it will. It's being audited by the state auditor. And then also remember, there may be some agreed upon procedures that we're going to put in place where not only does the state auditor audit you, but also you may have your independent auditor coming in to look at how you've collected the data that you've sent forward. Do we need to consider the impact of other auditors on the reports? Well, look, we have TRS, 1,027 school districts, I think it is, and 232 charter schools and education service centers, a bunch, you know, somewhere around 1,250 different entities here, all of which have independent auditors. So do we now have a situation where we have a report with 1,000 independent auditors reporting in? No, we don't. And that question first came to me when I was reading this. I thought, wow, who's going to coordinate all of that? And brilliantly, GASB said, no, I'm sorry, AICPA said in their audit standards, we should not consider this a group audit. That means no one coordinates this. TRS does their part, we do our part. TRS gets the information. If they have a problem with what they got from you, they're going to communicate with you. They don't have to worry about all the other auditors that are involved, just you and your auditor and the state auditor. And so it's not a group audit type of thing. So the independent auditor's report doesn't have to report about a group audit. They act as if no one else was involved in the audit of you except themselves. And so they don't need to report that our neighbor's auditor had this finding and it might have an impact on us. That's just not a relevant thing for them. Okay? Now, in your handout material, there is a copy of that particular section. It's 9600 in the audit guidelines that are clarified. You know, we have the clarified audit standards now. Section 9600 deals with that, and I just read it one day and I thought, well, that answers the question in an unbelievably direct way. Usually when you read some of those things, you have to read them 8 or 10 times to figure out what they said. On this one, though, it says, this is not a group audit, period. You know? So I thought, well, that's great. That's very straight. You know, I don't have to worry about how I figured that one out. So it's not a group audit. We don't need to worry about that. And we also do not need to worry about the fact that we need to generate lots of numbers. TRS is going to do that. They're going to send numbers back to us. So when they do send numbers back to us, what do we do with them? By the way, this slide is the one that talks about why it is not a special funding situation, because the non-employer is the only entity with a legal obligation to make contribution. That's not true. The state and the districts have that legal obligation, and of course your employees put some in. So this is not a special funding situation because of that situation. Okay? And again, that's a very important thing for us because it means that there are other people involved in this besides just the state. We had the required disclosures, and so I think probably, so we still have some time for questions. Let me summarize all of the reports that we're going to do. You're going to have to get the numbers from TRS. I imagine they're also going to give you the verbiage. When you look in the handout, what's your current note on financial statements? What does it look like right now? Maybe a page, 3/4 of a page to a page and a half, fairly small, right? Well, you better plan on about 6 or 8 pages on this new one, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be put in it. But you're not going to have to calculate any of it because it has to come from TRS. What you're responsible for doing is looking at what they've done and say, does this make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then you ask for clarification for it. If it does make sense, then we just go on. You know, that they give you that information. They probably also give you almost all the verbiage. They do that now, don't they? They tell you what the plan is, what the requirements are, what the percentages are, and your share is. They generally give you all those details so that you don't have to spend a lot of time writing that note. You don't need to spend time writing this 6 to 8 page note. In fact, what you might do, if you don't have somebody right now that's really competent in cut and paste, get somebody, because that's what it's going to be. You cut this and paste it in your notes, and you're basically through with that. Read them for the content to make sure that they make sense for you. Okay, and then there's that section on RSI. There are 2 tables in there. Each one of the tables has 10 columns in it, but that's assuming we've gotten through 10 years with this thing going. So the first year you're going to have 1 column. Second year you're going to have 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns, etc., up to 10. And then it's just like your tax schedule. In that 10th column out there, you roll up all of the previous columns before that. And so that will be your RSI report for it. Again, that data comes from TRS. You have no possible way of getting that data yourself. Your responsibility is to make sure the data that goes into TRS is valid data. So, what questions do you have? Yes, sir.
Let's see, I'll stand up.
Okay.
Everybody here. Okay, so I'm just a little bit confused, but maybe clarify it for me. In all that you discussed, are districts going to set up a new trust in a special revenue fund?
I don't see any need for that.
Okay, so are districts going to continue to record TRS on behalf the way they've always done it?
Yes, sir. In fact, in your handout material, the very last page of the handout material gives journal entries. They're very small. Ours will be much bigger because we do it by function. They've just done it by aggregation.
So the long and short of it is that we're just going to have a liability added to the government-wide financial statement. That's it.
That, well, yes, that's kind of it. But that, a very extensive note
Sure.
in RSI. But now, a part of the liability that has been carried by the state all this time goes to the district.
Yeah, but that's going to be reported on the government-wide financial statement.
Yes, there will be nothing in your fund level financial statements.
Nor will there be any created new fund in any of this.
No, GASB 68 didn't recommend that at all, and I don't see any reason to do that.
Well, no, I'm just asking, it just sounded like you were talking about this trust.
Oh, no, I was talking about the TRS's report is just like when you report for what is it, the benefits that are paid to outside people like scholarships and stuff like that. If you had one of those, you report just those two financial statements. TRS is going to do that with theirs. That won't affect us at all.
So we'll get this information from TRS
They said February.
February of 2015.
That's right.
And it'll have to be incorporated in our audit for the fiscal year ending in 2015.
That's right. See, if they get it to you in February, you have a lot of time to stick that baby in your notes and get ready for it, don't you?
Well, there's a phase in over I don't know how many years where the employees' percentage contribution to TRS increases. So I guess the plan is that ultimately that this unfunded liability will eventually become smaller and smaller, or maybe that's how they're addressing it.
Either that or the benefits will become larger and larger. Yes?
Bruce, our auditors have indicated to us that in order for this to take place, that it's going to require legislation and also. Do you agree with that?
I think the legislation has already taken place. I think that's already been done. I would have to check on that to be sure, but I know there was legislation proposed for it, but I thought it had already passed the legislature. Either that or no, I guess I'm wrong, the legislation hasn't, but the committees have met and decided what they're going to recommend, and I think the vote is kind of a foregone conclusion.
What's the opposite of the liability? Is that trust assets?
Yes, if you end up with, if TRS, wouldn't this be nice, but if TRS winds up with more assets, then it'd be our net pension asset instead of our net pension liability. Now that could happen if the stock market did what it did 3 weeks ago. If it did what it did this week, there ain't no chance.
I have another question.
Okay.
On the government financial statements, we're going to have a liability for
No.
our.
Oh yes,
What's our asset? They got a balance, right?
What?
That's what I was
It's just going to decrease my fund balance.
It'll decrease, that's what I'm saying, yeah, that position,
Okay, net position.
yes.
Okay.
So there won't be a corresponding asset.
No.
Like a due from the state. That's what I'd
No.
like to see.
No,
There won't be a due from the state.
no.
Oh, come on. So it's just going to reduce your.
Write your legislator.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now, of course, they're under pressure too, because well, the Tea Party is saying cut out everything, and others are saying cut out something, and others are saying don't increase things too much, etc. You know, there's just a battle for funds everywhere. So my guess is teachers' retirement is going to be fairly low on the priorities there. Border control, et cetera, will be much higher. Yes?
Good. Go ahead.
On that entry, are we taking it from the statement of activities over here? Is it our beginning that position and then coming over to the statement?
Yes.
So it's gonna hit both statements, so it's from,
Right.
is it gonna appear like a prior period adjustment, or just gonna let it line reduction?
No, it will go against your beginning net position to bring that in. Yeah, now, I have not seen that from Gatsby, but there's no other place for it to come from, as far as I can see. And when I go back to Gatsby 63, you remember that's where we did the, deferred net inflows and outflows?
Yes.
They said if this statement has an impact on government principles, that you reclassify. It's not a prior period adjustment. It'll be a prior period reclassification. You reclassify that beginning. Yeah.
Okay.
Now that's a very, very important theoretical difference. From a practice point of view, I have no idea whether it makes any difference at all. Okay.
There might be a possibility in some districts that you maybe would affect the net position to be negative.
Well, yes.
And if so, then what is that?
Well, now I don't know how TEA is going to handle that right now. You know,
It's not an issue.
well,
It's not an issue if you have a negative.
it used to be.
Not,
If you
not anymore. I mean, there are districts that have a lot of cabs that are founded with negative, and it's no big deal.
TEA passed a rule that if you were a rapidly growing district, so you were selling lots of bonds,
Yeah.
you hadn't built the buildings yet, then if you could end up with a negative unrestricted net position. You could end up with a negative unrestricted net
Oh, you
position.
got the wide financial?
Mm-hmm. And you would not flunk first. Now, I've been told they're rewriting first completely, but I haven't seen the results of that. Is that what they're doing, rewriting first?
Yes.
Okay. I have no idea what they'll be changing, and I don't have any idea whether or not TRS behavior will have any impact on that.
Supposedly, they're working on it right now, and they'll be releasing it in a couple of months. From what I understand, it's gonna affect 2014-15 data, that'll be implemented. And it'll be kind of a soft, what they call a soft,
Phase in.
And for that particular year, but they've got preliminary data right now out there
Okay.
that they've been working on, and we will be getting, and the number of disclosures, or number of items now on first is 20. I think I heard it's going down to 17 items, if that's correct, somewhere around that. It's gonna go down to the number of items they look at.
Okay.
But they're gonna be stricter. For example, it's gonna be harder to get that superior rating, and they're gonna have more categories also. That's the preliminary stuff.
How many of y'all think that our processes for first are already much too easy?
Yeah.
Do you? Okay.
There's too many superior chiefs.
89%.
How many of you think that our employees at our school districts are so good that they earn the superior? It's not an easy thing to do, but they earn it anyway. Nobody? Okay. I want to relate an experience I had. One summer when I was at UT El Paso, I had a class with 13 students in it. And on the first exam, they all made high A's. And I thought, wow, this is really something. And so I went to the office and I checked the grade point averages. Every one of them was an A-level student. But I think 6 or 7 of them were 4-point students. But all of them had 3.5 or higher averages. And I thought, well, it's really unusual to have a class structured like that, but it would be stupid for me to say at least one of them has to flunk and a third of them have to get D's, and that would not make any sense at all because they were already very superior. I like to think that Texas schools are superior. And I like to think that a lot of that is because TEA has been so good about providing us with guidance on how to record things and how to report them. I really believe that's true. Now, if y'all have ever visited other states, you know that the account coding structure in a lot of other states is just pure junk. You can't make anything out of it at all. In California, you can have 5 or 6 different codes for cash. In Texas, the code for cash is 1110. Whether that's in this fund or that fund or another fund or some other fund, cash is always 1110. But in California, depending on whether it's a private purpose trust fund or an enterprise fund or something like that, you can have a different code. In New Mexico, they have a very rigid code structure, but the state doesn't make anybody follow it. So when you go in there, it's just everyone's following it. I like to think that TEA in the past has given us such good guidance, and they've been so successful in getting these codes out, and y'all have been so successful at taking these codes and using them for management purposes like they should be used, then we're good. Okay? Just like I like to think that, well, no, I was going to say that Texas University football team is good, but that's not good. In fact, did y'all hear the Board of Regents had a meeting, and they said, in view of our decision to de-emphasize athletics, we've decided to renew your contract. Okay, well, you know, I don't think we have to say that we're not doing well. I wish I knew how we could transfer the same performance we have in finance to in instruction, but we have a different raw material there, don't we? In finance, our raw material is dollars, taxpayer. In instruction, it's children. Sometimes very uninspired. Sometimes uninspirable. You know, so we have a different raw material, and that's why our pass rate, our dropout rate, some of those things are pretty high. But I think in the finance area, we're good. Wow, I really got on my soapbox there, didn't I? Other questions? After a tirade like that, you've got to have a bunch of other questions, right? No? Hey, Jesus, thanks so much for inviting me, and I appreciate y'all listening. And if you need anything, the very last slide on this has all my contact information, phone number, and email, etc. And hope I'll see you again soon.
My name's Yvonne Murad, and I'm with Alamo Insurance Group. And some of y'all might know me from overseeing the Texas Health and Human Services Commission Insurance Program. And just want to kind of give you a little bit of information about myself. I have been in the insurance industry for over 15 years. And 6 years ago, I decided I wanted to kind of learn about Medicaid, about the Affordable Health Care Act, everything there was to know about Medicaid. And I decided to leave the private sector and go over to the public sector. A lot of people thought I was crazy. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And so I had a chance to kind of learn a lot of information about public funding for the schools, for the cities, as well as local health departments, and also for early childhood intervention. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of jump over from the private sector to the public sector and learn a little bit about the inside processing of the programs. And so I was responsible for the School Health and Related Services Program, the ECI program, the MHMR program, and a lot of the medical administrative cleaning programs. So for some of y'all, a majority of y'all are school districts, and how many are currently participating in SHARS? And how many are currently participating in the Medicaid administrative cleaning? Okay. So during the time that I worked for HHSC, a lot of school districts didn't realize that there was two programs. There's the SHARS program and the Medicaid administrative cleaning program, and there are two distinct programs. And what we kind of determined is that there was a lot of schools that were participating in SHARS and were not participating in the MAC program. And it was kind of shocking because they're two complete different programs. They're paid differently and they're handled differently. They're under the same agency, but the funding is completely different. And so when I talk Medicaid, a lot of people think SHARS, but there is two programs. There's also a lot of other funding programs that are out there, and that sometimes people aren't aware. I worked for the agency for over 4 years and didn't realize, oversaw the school health and related service program, and didn't realize that the Department of State Health Services actually had the SHAC committee. Are y'all familiar with the SHAC committee? Okay. That is a committee that was formed in 2005 under Senate Bill, I believe it was Senate Bill 42. And that is a committee that was formed and is overseen by the Department of State Health Services. And 4 years into working with HHSC did I find out that there was this committee of school districts coming together and talking about school health, improvements in school health outcomes. And so it was kind of shocking. The agency is large. HHSC is large. You've got a lot of sub-agencies and a lot of other funding opportunities that are out there for some of the school districts. And so it's knowing a little bit about the inside and where to go to kind of get those fundings. And so today I want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the fundings that are out there for y'all. Now, for the SHAC program, there's a lot of schools that are participating with it, and then there's also some people that are not even familiar with it. If you go up to the websites, and I'm going to give you all those websites later, you'll see the link, and it'll send you over to HHSC reimbursement section. And there's a section within there that talks about the Texas School Health Advisory Committee. And that advisory committee meets on a quarterly basis. And that committee is comprised of school district officials that pretty much meet together on a quarterly basis about how to improve school health outcomes. And the concept, when you think about it, it's basically not only are you improving the school health outcomes for the students, but you're also improving it for the community as a whole. Because the hope is that you will get this information, distribute this information about school health to the students. It will go back to the family, and the ultimate outcome is that it would improve Medicaid outcomes overall. So not only are you improving the attendance for your students, as far as being there on a student level, but also as far as improving Medicaid outcome in the state level as well. And so that's the concept, is to kind of get the schools to facilitate some of the Medicaid out there within the community. So some of the participation in the SHAC, some people don't actually realize that those functions that you're doing, whether you're doing health fairs or you're doing communication to the community or your students about improving health, those are your Medicaid administrative claiming opportunities. And the one thing that when we were working together at the state level is that I came in and I talked to a lot of people and I said, look, if I don't understand the program, the people outside are not going to understand the program. So we need to kind of put this on the school level, kind of help them understand what these activities are. You can go out to the website for the Medicaid administrative claiming activities and look under the school districts and kind of see some of those activities. And it's really hard sometimes because you have a financial background. Sometimes this is not just a special education function, but this isn't a function that's being performed kind of on a community level, also with your counselors, maybe with your nurses, identifying individuals that may need other services, whether it's Medicaid or improving health, establishing and coordinating a health fair within your district. And all these are activities. They're not SHARS activities because you're not delivering service to an individual basis. You're delivering service to a group as a whole. And so when you look at this, you're looking at, okay, so what kind of cost can I claim on something like this? Well, you're looking at your staff, just your staff basically, and your salaries for the staff. The coordination cost is kind of the time that they spend in doing these coordinated efforts. And then on top of that, the other cost that you're looking at is you're looking at your benefit costs. Anything that's tied to those employees are the costs that kind of are tied to some kind of reimbursement that you can get under your Medicaid Administrative Claiming Program. So that's your MAC program. Now this is just a couple of the list of items. The list is pretty long. It is on HHSC's website under the reimbursement section and kind of talks a little bit about some of the activities that y'all might be performing. The challenge at the school level and at the financial level is going out there and kind of finding these people, because you know these people and within your district are performing these functions. It's just trying to find out who at your district is performing these functions. So then we get into the school health and related services program. And this program has been kind of steered mainly for your special education. And the one thing with the SHARS program is that it's kind of been limited to special education and your individuals with special needs. But what I've provided y'all with is a little bit of information in reference to the IDEA section 300.8. And it's pretty broad when it talks about a disability, and it talks about the health or the basically the outcome or acute health problems that individual may have or that student may have that adversely affects the child's education performance. So some of these individuals may be in special ed, and some of these individuals may not have been identified yet. So when you talk about MAC, a lot of people in MAC, the people that are performing the activities for MAC, are identifying these people. Who are these people that could possibly meet some of these funding levels where we can get some of the funding back for the teachers and the costs associated with delivering these services at the school level. And so that is one challenge that I have not seen a lot of schools kind of go out there, and especially with some schools where asthma is a huge issue as well as diabetes. So I just want to kind of leave that out there for you because it's being overlooked by so many schools out there. And so here are some of the services that are delivered. When I work with a lot of the schools on the finance side, I usually get a call sometimes when the school districts received a letter from OIG or received an audit letter. How many have gone through the audit process with Texas Health and Human Services? Anybody yet? And it's kind of challenging. There's 2 audits. So just want to kind of give you a heads up. The first audit is usually dealing with Texas Health and Human Services, HHSC, OIG audit. And those are desk review audits. And what they'll do is they'll kind of look at your billing activity. And they'll take a look at your billing and they'll say, okay, out of these, I want to take a look at these files for these students. And then you pretty much basically send that information over to OIG and they'll kind of look at it. And they'll either disallow your costs based on documentation. Is that the audit that you went through? Or was it a cost report audit? Okay. So you are being audited on 2 bases. So the billing is done by the Texas HHSC OIG, and they look at the billing to see if your special education department is actually documenting the need of that student. And what they do is they can disallow your cost on that. And so what they'll do is they'll take a look at your documents and basically come back and disallow some of those fees and ask for you to pay it back. The other audit that's out there is the Texas Health and Human Services cost report. That is new. That just went into effect just this past year. And so if you haven't been audited, chances are that you're going to be selected for the review. So that process is new. So what I tell a lot of people or a lot of the school districts is that when you do get an audit, you want to dispute it. One, you want to look at your findings. You want to look and see if you have the appropriate documentation. And then you want to go ahead, and if you feel that you have the appropriate documentation, you do want to dispute it. You only have a short period of time to dispute that audit from the date that you get that letter. And then at that point, you dispute your findings. And the reason I tell you is because OIG in the audit process, they have so many auditors that are over there, and there are so many programs that they deal with. And the school program is just so different. A lot of times they look at the school as your typical medical provider. And the school is providing a service within the school setting. And they forget about that. And they just kind of disallow a lot of cost and services. And if it's in the rules, and if it's in your manual, and it allows y'all to do this, and allows you the cost, then you're entitled to that cost. And so the one thing is, you kind of look at those audits, and if you feel like there is a reason or you need justification, go ahead and dispute that audit. A lot of people tell me, well, Yvonne, why would I dispute it? It's the same agency. Because it's a different division. And then after you dispute it, go ahead and go through the appeal process. When you go through the appeal process, it's being looked at by a legal staff to kind of look at the rules and to see if you're in guidance. And sometimes you need to take it all the way to the appeal process so that you can just get a second look of eyes to look at that. So I just wanted to provide y'all with some of that because it was a challenge kind of looking at the audit with some of the districts, because when a person audits the schools, they disallow y'all for costs where you rely on the special education program to be documenting their information, to be obtaining their information, and you're handling the financial. So you got two different divisions, and a lot of times the special ed division is not documenting or is not providing or doesn't understand the financial impact to that. And all in all, what happens is that if that special education division is not documenting, it's the financial division that's pretty much going to have to take the beating on that. You're going to have to pay back, recoup those funds. You've delivered the service, and now it's pretty much going to be recouped from the state. So just wanted to kind of give you that feedback. When I meet up sometimes with people, it's pulling the program people with special education and finance people together to kind of resolve that. And I would suggest that if y'all do go through an audit, that's probably the best way to handle it kind of going forward. And you learn a lot of stuff during the audit process. Not only do you learn that the documentation part of it, but you also learn that you're missing out on some reimbursements that for some reason special education didn't identify during the process. And we'll talk a little bit about that next. So these are some of the services, and some people look at these and they're like, well, how could I be doing some of these services? They look like clinical services. But when you go in and you look at a little bit more of the detail in the description, you'll realize that you're performing a lot of these functions. You may have nurses that are out there that trying to understand what they're doing and how it relates to special education. And it's kind of wearing that hat not as a financial person, but also understanding the program side so that you can capture those costs. Because we see a lot of districts out there that miss a lot of opportunities where you have a special education, where you have a teacher that has a monitor or an assistant that is needed for a student, where the monitor and the assistant is not getting reported. And so it's really up to the financial people to kind of understand that special ed division and understand that there's cost out there, and that we just need to make sure that we're not only is it allowable, but that it's being documented, the need for that student, and if it's so, then it's a cost that you're entitled to. So while working at the state, the main things that, I have an insurance background, and the main things I saw out there is that there was a lot of costs not being reported at the school district. And some districts are just hesitant. Like they're afraid everybody's going to come over and audit them for some reason. But there's some districts that weren't aware that when you have costs and you have your special education division, the bulk of your cost is going to be your salary cost. But somehow along the line, a lot of people forget that with that salary cost, the employee also has benefits costs that are paid by the district. The benefit cost in so many cases for a lot of schools gets left off. And especially with TRS increasing rates on the insurance side, it's something that some of the districts might want to consider. So some of these, because we have an insurance background, we kind of sit there and talk to districts. Don't forget to take a look at some of your insurance costs, your unemployment. Some of y'all may be with TASB or y'all with the TASB Risk Management Fund. They have a premium where you're paying for insurance costs or you're paying for workers' comp costs. But a bulk of this insurance cost comes from your employee benefits. Anything that is tied to what you're paying for that employee and that employee is delivering service is an allowable cost under the program. So just kind of having to understand special education, going in there and realizing, okay, any kind of cost that's tied to that, if y'all have questions, y'all might want to just kind of email the Charis division and just get clarification. And the other thing I learned at the state is that people don't like change, and I think that's with everybody. But you as a group, as a bunch of school members and participants and officials and people with a background, a financial background, if for some reason y'all as a group feel like something needs to be changed, whether you're not getting reimbursement for a certain item or certain types of services are not being taken into account, realize that the state has an option to change the state medical plan. And it is to help y'all, benefit y'all, and reimburse y'all to your cost of the program for delivering services to the Medicaid population under special education. And so if for some reason you feel like there's a cost out there that the state is not taking into account, then you might want to go back, come together as a group, and kind of present that to the state and let them know that it's something that needs to be taken into consideration. A lot of the times the state just takes the information by what's going on internally, and they are not familiar with your operations. They deal a lot with medical providers, and so they need to get that feedback from the school districts as well as from TEA, okay? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave some contact information for you and also take some questions if y'all have any questions in reference to the SHARS and MAC program. Anybody? Yes?
So I was just going to see if I understood you correctly. So if you have somebody who does a paraprofessional who does basically shadow a student from class to class to make sure that they are paying attention and all that, that's not an educational need, that is a medical service events.
That actually gets classified by a lot of school districts under personal care services.
Well, we had that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a person working in special ed who came on, and we paid for her salary from, some federal money. But anyway, so she came in and she told us that we could do all that and we put all these people on. And then later on, TASB told us that we could not.
No. You can talk to somebody mainly in the policy division, and what happens is that when you go down and you look at the personal care services, the main thing that HHSC will disallow is that they're going to look at that student and they're going to look at that student's IEP documentation, and if that student documents a need for a paraprofessional to kind of shadow them to and from, then that is going to justify the need for that individual. And so if you have costs associated with it, as long as it's justified and it's identified in the IEP, everything that drives that cost is in the IEP. And that's where it comes from. You can go look at the class in the program under personal care services. It is very broad. It is very broad, and you can probably fit a lot of people. But what drives everything, and where a lot of schools get disallowed, is that they are not able to justify it on the IEP.
So I just need to go back and talk to the person that oversees the SHARS part of IEPs and make sure that they're documented.
Yes, yes. And there's some examples, like when you go out to the, and I'll leave my card for you, but when you go out to the SHARS website, and sometimes it's hard to find because it's just scrolling through so much, but I'll send you the link. There's examples on the FAQs with TEA, and they give you examples of exactly how the IEP should be documented. Because that is a huge disallowance. A lot of people, a lot of the auditors will look at the findings and say, well, this wasn't appropriate documentation, or this does not justify the needs for that employee, or the needs for the student services. And so that's where a lot of the cost gets disallowed. So, but if you look at those examples, it shows the do's and don'ts of documentation on the IEPs. Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I think she did say that employee was fully funded. So on the cost report, that cost is going to be removed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the person was, I'm sorry, I had I couldn't remember what fund she was, but she was paid, she was solely hired under ARA funds to help increase our SHARS and Medicaid. And she was only going to be kept on in her salary, the extra money that we got from Medicaid,
Mm-hmm.
The SHARS program, benefit, that's what we were going to pay her out of. So she came in and she did all this, and she was highly knowledgeable. She had worked for HHSC and New Alliance, so she came and put all these people on. But unfortunately, she passed away. She had a heart attack and she passed away. And so then the next person that came on said, no, that wasn't. So we went to TASB to
Get
resolve it.
clarification.
And our consultant said, no, it wasn't. But I went to the TASB conference this past April, and one of her colleagues
Said
told
yes.
the whole audience it was.
Mhm.
So we're back to square one, and so, this is a good chunk of money. So, that question answered.
Yeah, and the one thing on the, like, you can, even though the cost report has been closed, you do, as long as they haven't settled that cost report, you can go back and ask them to reopen it and put in those costs back. But what ties to everything is that those individuals should have been on the participant list.
They were
Okay.
on the participant list, and they did everything, and then when somebody brought this to somebody else's attention, there was worry within finance that there would be an audit and we would have to pay back money. And so the powers that we opted to, when we do the participant list, that we just take those people off. We don't report their cost per se. And then the next time when they have the participant list open, we remove the people, which then of course we have variance on the reporting part, and we had to
Provide
an answer for
a
that.
response.
And so we did, and no one has come back, and it's been 2 years, I believe.
Yeah. So on your cost report, if for some reason, like during the year, or you find out that there's costs that you could have taken into consideration, you can always ask for them to open up the cost report, as long as it's not during a desk review audit, and it hasn't been settled. Once it's settled, you kind of lose that opportunity. And then to go back to your statement, when you're inputting individuals, there is a slot that allows you to kind of back out the federal funds on the cost report. So you're able to kind of put that input that information and put their costs, and then back it out with the federal funds on the cost report. Did anybody have any other questions? My boss here.
So I understand the MAC is basically a way to recoup money that we put into outreach to the general community or the student population.
Yes.
Identify students who need special.
It's not only just for special education, but also for like improving health outcomes.
Like dyslexia.
Dyslexia, any kind of outreach, teen pregnancy, kind of anything that is health related. So MAC is kind of like it's an outreach, and it's done, and you're able to get reimbursement for that for the staff that are kind of doing these coordination, because it is time consuming, sitting over and having a committee put together, developing the health fair, looking at bringing in people and calling individuals that are going to participate in the health fair. Some of these efforts are pretty time consuming, and it is a cost to the district. The only problem is that the cost that you get reimbursed for is only the salary and benefit cost of that individual, because the state looks at the indirect costs, or the administrative costs is all applied by the indirect costs. And so the other thing, there's also under the Texas Department of State Health, there's a division that deals with nothing but Texas schools health. And sometimes you can pull some data or statistical data about your region and get a lot of information. It'll kind of start you up with, okay, you know, I want to improve outcomes for this type of health issues that are going on within the region. And so it kind of promotes that opportunity to kind of look at the data at the Department of State Health Services. And then there is also grant funding that the Texas Department of State Health Services gets, that if you wanted to kind of facilitate an educational information about shots or anything that has to do with improving health, then they'll have a grant out there for some of the schools as well. So let me see if I have the link. I don't have the link on here, but you can go into the Texas Department of State Health Services. So it's DSHS. And if you put in the Texas School Health Advisory, I believe it's Council, so it's TSHAC. And they're always looking for school districts to kind of participate, and they meet up in the Austin area, and it's pretty interesting. So they kind of share just kind of table topics about discussions on where to go and how to improve healthcare. Sometimes some of the nurses are participating in some of the information as far as facilitating it back from TSHAC to the school district. So, any other questions? Yes?
Most districts probably use a third-party administrator to help them organize and submit costs.
Mm-hmm. So the one thing that Scott's talking about over here is that when we have insurance background, and I've got a finance accounting background, and the one cost that we see a lot as risk managers out there is the cost of self-funding that gets left off. And some of the schools, they're kind of just taking the basic costs, like their excess costs for their stop-loss insurance if you're self-insured, and not really reporting the claims that are being paid on an annual basis for the self-funded program. So in the workers' compensation, we get a lot of schools that don't report the claim costs associated with it in self-funding. And so that's the one thing Scott's and I have kind of identified with a lot of schools, is that they're doing just reporting of the excess or just the insurance policy, but not the self-funded portion of their claim costs where they're paying out. And what happens is that the risk management division is somehow still within the CFO or maybe in the HR division separate, and it's got its funding that's going on and being paid, but it's because it's a cost to the school, and the school is self-funded and it's being paid by the school, it is a cost that is allowable under the SHARS program as well. And so we tend to get a lot of people who miss that cost. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot is, as risk managers, we also see the some of the claims out there for special education. Some of the claims are pretty expensive when it comes to special education because you may have a student that acts out and hits a teacher, and that teacher may be out for months, and payments for medical expenses as well as indemnity expenses is paid out to that fund. It is a cost that's tied into SHARS that is also allowable for the SHARS program. Any other questions? Well, I hope that helps. I'm going to go ahead and I have some business cards if y'all need some. I also have my contact information, and it's always changing, you know, out there as far as, you know, the program. There's a lot of new faces over there at Texas Health and Human Services, and I do still talk to a lot of people over there. I know that there's somebody here from the city. Is there somebody here from the city of Houston? Okay. Well, there's so many programs out there, and a lot of times it's just kind of finding a program, and it's just finding the right person that can give you that information. And so if y'all ever have any questions, or y'all kind of get an audit, and y'all want to kind of, a lot of people get scared, they get an audit, but it's just them trying to kind of make sure that there's oversight to the program. So feel free to call me if y'all have any questions. Thank you.
We wanted to come, Jesus had asked us, we had some discussions with Jesus, and we discussed our commercial paper program that we initiated for San Antonio ISD. It's only the second program of its type in the state of Texas for a school district. And after we had some discussions with Jesus, he was gracious enough to invite us over and wanted us to talk a little bit about our experience, what we did to set up the program, and some of the challenges that we experienced, what things that we would do differently. And how many of you are familiar with commercial paper? Probably as investments mostly. Have any of y'all actually issued commercial paper as the issuer of CP notes? Again, there's only one other school district, that's Austin ISD, that has done that, but it is a common, yep, there it is, great, thank you. It is a common mechanism for, thank you. It's a common mechanism for counties and usually revenue-backed bonds, so you'll see utility systems that use it. And I was trying to find a good way to describe what a commercial paper actually is, and let's see, how do I scroll down? Okay, there you go. And I was trying to rack my brain, and I Googled commercial paper, and really this definition is pretty much sums it up quite well. You know, it's a short-term obligation issued by a governmental entity, usually backed by a line of credit with a bank that matures within 270 days. And the issuer typically pays maturing principal of outstanding commercial paper with newly issued commercial paper, referred to as a rollover, thereby borrowing funds on a short-term basis for an extended period of time. And then the rates reset periods may vary from 1 to 270 days, and different portions of a single issue of commercial paper may simultaneously have different reset periods. So the main concept there is, again, these are very short-term obligations, no longer than 270 days. But the way that the district can carry that over is through these rollovers. So they're not, let's say that a note has a 30-day maturity, they're not going to be paying that principal in 30 days. What they're going to do is they engage a dealer to go out and issue new notes, and they use that revenue from the new notes to pay off the principal, and they're only responsible for the interest payment, which we'll discuss here in a little bit. So the functions of commercial paper, it really, because it's such a short maturity, it enables a district to really have somewhat of a line of credit function. They can work with their commercial paper dealer to get money as they need it. So it's kind of it equates to sort of a line of credit. And the commercial paper can be issued as invoices for project expenditures are presented. And let's see here. It also, and Lisa will get into this in a little bit more detail, but it also becomes an effective tool to manage your INS tax rate. For San Antonio ISD, we issued these as tax-exempt commercial paper. So again, you're benefiting from the short-term maturity, which traditionally carry a lot lower interest rates, but also they're tax-exempt, so they get to enjoy an additional lower interest rate. We discussed the maturities. It's 270 days or less, and that, because it's 270 days or less, it becomes exempt from Rule 15C212. Are you guys familiar with Rule 15C212, continuing disclosure? Well, the SEC it's an SEC Rule 15C212 that it requires certain disclosures to be made. You have to have your annual financial statements. All the commercial paper notes are exempt from all of that, which is an additional benefit of the CP notes. Because it's considered, I guess, in the eyes of the law as a more sophisticated investment, there are particular qualifications. The district limits who can issue CP notes. In particular, they limit school districts. For whatever reason, they have additional burdens on school districts. One of which is you need to have an ADA of 50,000 or more. That's a big or there, because there aren't too many school districts that have that student population. But it could also be an issuer that has at least 100 million in outstanding or proposed to be outstanding long-term indebtedness. So if you have 50 million outstanding and you're calling a $50 million bond election, you would qualify, as long as the next bullet point here is that you have your outstanding debt or the debt that you propose to issue is rated in the 4 highest rating categories for long-term debt instruments. So that's where a lot more school districts will qualify and be able to issue commercial paper if they so choose. And is there any questions at this point? I know I've kind of breezed through the concept of commercial paper. And at any time if there is, please feel free to jump out and just ask a question or anything in general about public finance, bonds. Any questions you may have, please feel free to just raise your hand and stop us at any time. As with the traditional bonds, these commercial papers are still subject to the 50-cent test, and we had to kind of work through that with San Antonio ISD being only the second school district to utilize a commercial paper program. A lot of these details were still not really ironed out as to how do we fit in a short-term maturity that has resets into the 50-cent test. Well, what the AG's office has determined is that first of all, are you guys familiar with the 50-cent test? You know that? Okay, very good. I'm seeing some heads jump up. It's essentially, you need to be able to demonstrate to the Attorney General's office that you can pay your outstanding debt plus your proposed debt with a 50-cent tax levy on your INS side. So even though bonds are backed by an unlimited pledge, we kind of have this as this hurdle that we have to go through when we issue debt. Well, the AG's office informed us that the way that they wish to handle these commercial paper notes is that you take the capacity of the entire program, and generally for SAISD, I guess we'll use them as the example here. They had 100 million capacity for the commercial paper program. They wanted us to take that entire 100 million capacity and demonstrate that they have the ability to pay it not at the low interest rates that they typically will see, but they actually want us to demonstrate that they could pay for that $100 million at a traditional interest rate. And we relied on the financial advisor's good faith estimate at what the market conditions would have been for an interest rate at that time for that CP capacity. Another important point is that since it's, yes?
Does that qualify as short-term debt or long-term?
For the commercial, it's short-term debt. It is short-term debt, but because you can go out and issue up to $100 million the next day if you wanted to, the AG's office wants a demonstration that you're going to be able to pay for that debt.
Usually on the debt side, there is a qualifying underlying structure. What was the structure for the commercial paper under the Texas law?
The structure, so it falls under Chapter 1371, which is, you traditionally see that for refunding bonds. But the underlying structure, it is a commercial paper program, and it's recognized as a commercial paper debt structure.
I guess falls under what chapter of the code? Is it a revenue bond?
Right.
What kind of GO bond?
So it is a GO bond, and it is a Chapter 45, just like your traditional bonds. And then that's why it has to be voter approved, because it's backed by the unlimited INS tax pledge. So it is a GO bond. Now traditionally, when you hear commercial paper notes, you're going to think of a revenue-backed pledge with a utility system or a county that has particular revenues. But for a school district, it's a general obligation pledge that requires voter approval. And it's important when you're conducting your election that you include language that will allow you to pay for certain expenses related to the commercial paper program with your tax levy. And you can see, this is a very common proposition language. Usually at the actual ballot language is a lot smaller, but you have your proposition language and the ballot language. But this is common, but this last sentence right here is what enables us to pay for certain expenses out of the INS tax levy. Before I go any further, are there any comments here from the panel? I don't want to take up all the time here. I know we've got some slides for you guys here in the future. No comments yet? Any more questions? All right, we'll move forward here. So backing up a little bit, who are the participants in the CP program? You've got your issuer, of course, bond counsel and financial advisor, rating agents. And those are the traditional parties that you see in your normal GO, traditional bond. But these next three participants are unique to a commercial paper program. The first one is the commercial paper dealers. They serve like an underwriter function, but they are not technically underwriters, because these are the individuals that the district will rely on to go sell their notes. And again, one of the benefits of this program is that it's an on-demand type financing. So if Lisa gets, she knows that she's having a $2 million invoice coming in about a week, she dials up her CP commercial paper dealer and lets them know, hey, I'm going to need $2 million in a week. And they will go out and they reach out to their clients and their contacts in that area, and they arrange for that money to come in for them. One of the also trademarks of a CP program is that they're backed by a credit or liquidity provider. Because if we back up again, when we mention the district is only paying the interest on these CP notes as they move forward, and they're relying on a remarketing of that note to pay for the principal. Well, what happens if the CP dealer can't remarket that note and it fails? Well, that's why you have this liquidity provider, and it's usually a bank, a large bank that sets aside, in SAISD's case, $100 million, because that's their full capacity, to have it on standby in the event there's ever a failed remarketing. So the bondholder will always get his money because he knows that, in our case, Royal Bank of Canada has set aside $100 million, and he will get paid when his note matures in 20 or 30 days or whatever it may be. And because of that liquidity provider, the district gets to enjoy extremely low interest rates. Yes?
If the intent is to remarket or to continue to roll those over, then what is the referendum? What are they approving as far as a term? Because, I mean, the paper's 270 days or less, but you're going to maybe resell or remarket that at maturity. So I don't understand what the voters are authorizing.
Sure. So the voters, of course, will authorize the particular use of the proceeds, so school buildings or whatever it is, but they also, as you mentioned, approve a term, and it's generally a term not to exceed 40 years. We put the maximum allowed by law. Since these keep circulating under the eye of the law, it's not that they technically are maturing in 270 days or less, but as long as we pay that off before 40 years, it's in compliance with the law. And practically speaking, what ends up actually happening is that we are going to, let's say we slowly, and SAISD did this recently, we built up to we're nearing our capacity, $100 million. We had issued note here, note there, note here, and we are approaching $100 million. What we do is, to restore capacity, we refund those notes. So we refund them with your traditional refunding bonds that go out for 20 years or 30 years.
And then, the administrative costs, the cost of the remarketing and the resale, how does that compare to like issuing variable rate debt?
So that's a great question, and we're going to address both of those. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over here to my panelists.
So CP is a form of variable rate debt. I think right now in the market for school districts, what you're seeing a lot of are soft put bonds. And those are done for usually, they can be in various different modes. A lot of what school districts are doing now are term rate modes, where they're fixing a certain term for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And so those costs of issuance are paid when that bond is being remarketed at that time. Commercial paper is an ongoing annual cost. I believe for the district it's roughly 40, 45 basis points, which includes your liquidity costs. I believe yours is 35. And then you're paying the commercial paper dealer 5 basis points. So by putting this language in there that Umberto talked about before, you can work that into your tax rate. Yes, there is an ongoing cost annually, but the benefit to the taxpayers in the form of interest savings far exceed what those costs are. But yes, there is an additional and an annual ongoing cost.
So that cost benefit analysis this is more lucrative than issuing, say, for a longer, shorter term bond, like for 2 years or something. Exactly. And this seems like you're going to have to remarket more often, but you're saying that the net savings on the interest cost outweighs that administrative cost.
Correct. So with SAISD,
Go ahead and jump to that slide.
So with SAISD, their ongoing costs are roughly 40 basis points. The interest rate that they're currently paying on their commercial paper when they roll is between 7 and 9 basis points. 7 and 9 basis points. So, but the total all-in cost is roughly 0.5%. If you were to do say a VRDO, VRDB soft put bond, and you do it for 2 or 3 years, you're probably going to be paying 1.25%. So you're paying 75 basis points more.
And what about
Traditional fixed rate at the time, which we monitor very closely, the district would have sold 30-year debt at about 4%. I think it's 3.97. And right now they're paying 0.5%, all in cost. Interest expense on this program is 8 to 9 basis points. So it's significantly less than either doing a traditional fixed rate or even a soft put bonds.
And we've got those expenses listed right here. I don't know if Lisa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think really the benefit for us is carry cost. We're not just sitting on bond proceeds.
Short-term rates, sure, but then you can turn it,
Can you hear me?
refund it to long-term.
Yeah, so it's, the way that it's being used right now, it's more of a interim type financing. And we plan on ramping it up and then refunding. But once we reach the point where we've issued all that we're authorized to issue, then that's when we're gonna have to weigh whether or not we wanna leave money in that program at the lower rates. Because right now, paying, I think we were looking at 54 basis points, and that's all in. So if we don't have anything outstanding, we're still paying, up to 5 basis points, but we have that luxury of being able to access it as needed. So it's, it definitely keeps them. Hear me? I'm sorry, this thing is. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess, in this interest rate environment, it sounds attractive, but what happens in a rising interest rate environment then? I mean, if you're stuck out there and you got $100 million invested in this program, and interest rates start to decline, and, it becomes maybe more difficult to turn, I don't know, I just.
Yeah, a couple of things to that. One thing to remember too is when you're selling a VRDO, VRDB soft put bond, you're selling the entire, you're selling 100 million today, and you're going to be paying 1.25, 1.5 percentage points on that 100 million. The luxury of the CP program, if Lisa gets an invoice for 2 million this week, 5 million next week, she's only paying interest on that 7 million, which is an additional savings and benefit. Now, the program allows you to refund or fix out, or you can, do it when you start seeing an interest rate environment that may be rising. And everybody right now has mentioned that we've been in a rising rate and interest environment for the past 5 years, when it's done the complete opposite. So it is flexible enough to give you the opportunity to, if you get nervous about the market, certainly go out and fix bonds out. You can do that in probably 30 to 60 days and go into any mode from there, whether it be fixed rate, whether you then want to jump into soft variable rate bonds or what have you.
Even though the authorized is a CP program, you can switch to.
The authorization, is usually flexible enough, as Humberto, if you put it in the election order, for you to allow that flexibility for you to do as you wish, you can.
Does the election order have to say that you could sell commercial paper?
Nope. So that's what's nice. You're not authorizing the particular debt instrument that you're going to use. You are authorizing an amount not to exceed. So you're authorizing $50 million. It doesn't say that you have to issue them as traditional bonds or commercial paper notes or another type of note. So the election order says, give us authority to go into $50 million of debt, basically. And the instrument that you use is up to the discretion of the board.
I think one of the other points is this is basically debt that you can sell, that you can call at any time and pay down, but you're not paying for call options. So it's just a very flexible type of product that you can use to help you manage your tax rate if you want to pay down debt early. If you have, tax collections that are slightly excess or a little more, you can just pay down debt and not have any sort of penalty attached to that. So that's one of the other benefits that we were looking at.
I don't know, Lisa, do you want to go over this slide? This is one of your slides. This is the actual demonstration of just the realized savings that SAISD has experienced. And again, we closed on the CP program in April. April of this year, and within that time, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, so this schedule here, what I asked the FAs when I was working with them close to closing, what I asked them to do was on the day that we closed on this program, could you tell me what the rate would have been if I had sold that up to the total amount of my program? What rate would I have gotten on a fixed rate deal? Because that's telling me what my savings are. So what we were able to, we used actual interest paid on the program for the time period that's listed here. So from April 2nd to September 18th. If this is the savings that we generated by issuing CP as an interim type financing until we could refund. So that's $1.7 million, and that's, how many months are we looking at that? That's 6 months. That's the savings that we generated. And then we refunded these bonds into soft put bonds, which were also issued at a very low rate. And we're just trying to, prior to having this program in place, we had your typical 30-year bonds that we would issue and then sit on proceeds while we waited for the invoices to come in. So we learned the way spending patterns were working at our district and started to look outside of the box for what we could do to actually minimize that impact to our tax rate, to our taxpayers. So this was, I've worked with these programs. I've probably worked with 3 different programs. I've set up my own program. So this was something that I was comfortable with. This is my first school district that I worked for, so I've been fortunate to be able to bring my prior experience working for power companies and with the city and with the county. I've been trying to utilize all my resources, not just what school districts typically use. So this definitely was something that was outside of the box, and there was only one other school district that did this, but knowing what I knew about these programs, I knew we could make it work for the city with the help of my FAs and the city, for the district with the help of my FAs and council. And we were able to structure it to our needs, and that's one of the things that if you all are thinking about looking at one of these programs, just be sure and scrutinize it and make it your own, because each of us have our own needs and our own challenges, and I just highly encourage you to try to just tailor it to your needs. Really get into the weeds and into the details when you're structuring documents and such, because you can make it a great product. It's a bit complicated. I'm not going to trivialize that, but it definitely pays for itself. Handsome.
Do you encumber your contracts against the funds before you sell the paper, or how do you handle that?
For the purposes of the contracting? Yes, I mean, we can use that because basically we're using that as almost as a credit card. We know when we put those in place that there's a funding source for it. We'll set up a budget and I just fund it as needed.
So in the prior slide where it said capacity, 100 million program capacity.
Yes,
What happened on April the 2nd, 2014?
Right, so.
Did you sell $100 million worth of commercial paper?
No. So that's a very good question. And we had a timetable in the presentation. We closed on April 2nd. Traditional closing, that means money is coming to your bank account that day. For the CP program, it's kind of an uneventful closing because all that happens on closing is we now have the legal authority to issue up to $100 million at any time of commercial paper program. Being mindful of our entire voter authorized limit. So in San Antonio ISD's situation, or in the case of San Antonio ISD, they had a $515 million voter approved election. That's their authority, their voter authority. We have a $100 million commercial paper program. At all times, we had to be mindful of what's been issued before and what's being issued at the CP program, and that can never exceed that $515 million. A very good question. And I guess, Lisa, do you want to go, we already touched upon the costs here. As you can see, really your biggest cost is going to be for your liquidity facility, right?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go with fees. So basically, there's some fees that you pay that are just based on the notes that you have outstanding. Dealers, you'll only pay them based on the card that they've issued. We have 2 dealers. I just split this in half and allocated 50 million to one dealer and 52 to our other dealer. And my motive for that is I want to be able to see that I'm getting market rates. And so the way I've actually worked this is if I'm going to sell $10 million worth of notes, I'm going to assign 5 to one, 5 to the other, and I try to sell them as close to the same time as possible so I can see if I'm getting market rate. And they've been really good. They've come in basically right on top of each other. They have, they have different preferences for terms that they'll write out. Some will write for 40 days, some will write for 60 days or shorter. It's all based on their customer base. If I need to have them come due on a certain date, I can call my dealers, tell them, please target this date. They can get right on the date that you need them to. My preference is, if I were to just have a program in place that I was just utilizing just for the short-term interest rate, I would typically tell them, you guys sell to the term that you need to sell, because they know market conditions a whole lot better than I do. They're out in the market every day. This is their job. But if I tell them, write it out to this certain date, they're really good at doing that. So that's the first year.
I mean, just one other thing. I think something else when Lisa chose to go into commercial paper dealer split at 50-50, it creates a level of competition between the banks. They know that, hey, I've got some competition out there. Lisa's going to call them for a piece, me for a piece. We need to have our sales guys out there being aggressive, so ultimately the taxpayers are the ones that are benefiting with the best interest rates possible.
We had a question back there.
Obviously, they're not PSF.
That's a very good question. We have quite the war story for you.
Right.
No PSF.
Okay, and do y'all buy insurance?
So that's where the credit facility, the liquidity provider. Yeah, so they're the ones who they really are an insurance policy for a failed remarketing. So if we're constantly turning over these CP notes, if there's ever a failed remarketing, that liquidity provider under their contract has 3 hours. It's amazing. Up to $100 million, these banks can produce $100 million in 3 hours. But in 3 hours, they will pay that bondholder whatever whatever amount is owed because of the failed remarketing.
And although the commercial paper itself does not have the benefit of the PSF guarantee, if you fix out these issues within a 3-year time span from the initial date, they do qualify for PSF. So once you decide to fix them out on a 20, 25, or 30-year basis, if your district is able to...
Through a refund?
Yes,
exactly.
They will get PSF from that point. PSF, the benefit here right now with rates so low as they are, is there really a benefit to adding that on? No, but we could talk for a long time about the process that we went through with TEA and still gotta know. And actually they're in the process of changing the language to make it more so that you're not able to get it. But they will receive PSF as long as you do it within a 3-year time period. The bonds, just like any other issue, if your district is able to qualify and use PSF, they will receive PSF.
Okay, so when San Antonio decided they want a $100 million program, did they know how they were going to spend that $100 million? Not really. Or you did?
Yes, we prior to the bond proposition, we went through a plan, and we have a 5-year capital plan that we were going to do. We were going to renovate schools, and so this is basically treated as almost any other bond issue. It has to follow those same purposes that were authorized by the voters. It really is just interim financing right now. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Did y'all do an OS?
So if you recall, the slide that we had earlier said that it's exempt from the Rule 15 C212. So Rule 15 C212 dictates the contents of an OS. However, so we don't have to have an official statement. We still do generate what's called an offering memorandum, which serves a similar function as an OS, but is not subjected to the tight SEC rules. But the dealers do use that. I'll turn over to Ricardo about the function, how the dealers use the offering documents there.
Yeah, I mean, it's really no different than an official statement. I mean, they use it as they go out when Visa calls them. If there's a buyer or a client that needs some paper in their portfolio, the dealer will then send out that and say, well, here's SAISD, and they use that as their sales tool, yay or nay, whether they're going to be invested or not, based on the documents that are in there from the school district. It functions almost exactly like an official statement.
From the time that you started with a commercial paper to how long do you intend to continue with those same 100 million? At some point you're going to have to go long term.
That's right. And we actually...
You said this is interim financing. Eventually you're going to lock in at some rate for 20 years or 25 years, whatever that is.
Which is what we just did.
How far from that first time to when that happens? Is it a year, 2 years?
No, it was about 6 months.
6 months.
Because this is what we're using to fund everything that's going through our bond program right now. And so it was ramped up relatively quick.
And Lisa, at that time, the district also was at a period in their capital improvement plan where it was a really active period, right? Do you anticipate a similar, that fast of a draw, or are things going to slow down?
Well, we hit our peak period already, which was during the 6 months. We have a very old school district. Buildings are very old, so we don't have good estimates of our cash flows, which is one of the primary reasons why we put this in place. But do I envision that happening as quickly? No, I don't. I don't even want to guesstimate. There's a reason why we have this. We really needed to have this type of flexibility.
And so the fixing out is basically dependent on when your CP program reaches its capacity. So SAISD was able to vet contracts, get receipts in to where they spent $100 million over the summer. So at that point, Lisa then said, okay, well, I want to be able to do the same thing. We then fixed out that $100 million with a VRDO and said, okay, Lisa, now you have another $100 million of capacity as contracts come in, as you need to write checks for that ability.
This obviously seems to be a program that might eliminate the need for reimbursement resolution, because sometimes you don't have the money in the bank and you need to issue a contract 30 days earlier.
Right.
You're in the process of selling bonds and things are crazy, and
yep.
you have to borrow from somewhere.
That's right.
And in that case, you basically just pick up the phone to your dealer and say, I need $30 million, and then you have it within 48 hours.
Is that quick? Yes.
So would you say that your interest rate risk is only 6 months in that particular scenario? That the interest rates haven't changed from 6 months ago, from the time that you initially went into it to the time that you're going to go long term, that it didn't move higher from that time to this time? So it's just a 6 month scenario?
Yes, so I have 2 comments on that. So one, yes, in SAISD's case, their exposure was for that 6 month period. One of the purposes of the refinancing is to restore capacity, right? So if we're getting close to our 100 million capacity, we refund and we're now back to our 100 million. But if SAISD were to issue $20 million and then let's say the market, did something crazy the next day, they don't have to wait till they get to capacity. They can refund they can start the process that day of moving forward with the refunding. I'll let Ricardo or Lisa touch a little bit more on that. And really, at that point, you're just limited to how fast can you do a refunding,
Yeah, and that can happen in 30 to 45 days out of the CP program.
But
I I think one of the things that as issuers that you have to accept or come to terms with is, are you willing to have a portion of your debt outstanding in this type of mode? You know, that's, you're gonna analyze your debt portfolio, and, you know, rating agencies, I don't know where this rule of thumb came from, but they're comfortable with 20 to 30%. They kind of give pause past 25, but they're not gonna think you too hard if you're at 30% of your debt being in this type of structure.
I've got your debt portfolio up here, just so you know. This
So-
is SAIC's debt portfolio.
You know, this is something that it's a decision that you're gonna have to make. We don't know what the market will look like. So some people just, I know some issuers and the issuers where I've worked in the past, they just, as a matter of policy, will have up to 20 to 25% of their debt outstanding in this mode. And what they typically view as a hedge is, okay, so if you have, you know, on a regular day, $100 million worth of cash, what they're saying is, if you can match it against this debt, when your rates go up that you're earning in cash, it's gonna offset your rate going up with this. So it's a natural hedge per se for your cash that you have on hand. But, you know, if you're gonna try to make the call when, you know, you have interest rate risk in that, it's gonna be a very rough ride for you. You just have to accept that this is part of your portfolio and manage it that way, because if not, it could get really difficult.
Is it subject to arbitrage?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Not a problem now, but.
Right.
Well, it's, you know, as you know with that, I mean, you can earn up to what you pay, you just have to pay it back. So, I mean, arbitrage it's tedious, but it's not overwhelming.
Well, do you still have the spin down exceptions on it? On this particular kind of
But
debt?
basically the way we're using it is we spend it as we're spending it, that's when we issue. So we're matching the inflows and the outflows.
Yeah, so there's
That's
really
not
not too
really
much of an opportunity
Yeah.
to invest. Yeah. Yeah, she gets the money and she turns around and pays.
So what I think I'd like to touch on, if you guys are interested, is what the daily interaction is here, and it's not overwhelming per se. I think the biggest portion of your work is going to happen with the setup, because you're going to want to review all the documents. You're going to want to, you know, basically be in the mix. You don't want to leave this up to just your FAs and council. You want to weigh in. You want to tailor this to your district. It's very time consuming, and I don't know if y'all had a chance to look at the timeline. The timing on this was horrible. We were issuing RFPs right before we closed for the Christmas holiday, and so we put them out on the street and then asked for them to turn in questions, like right in the middle of when we were closed. So for me, that was inconvenient. I wish we had been, you know, if one of the questions to them, you know, what would we have done differently? The timing, if you can help it avoid holidays. But in my experience, that's been the hardest part, is setup. As far as a daily type of transaction, if you're using it as an interim financing, you're going to deal with it probably once every other week. If you can, what I typically like to do is build up block size, meaning I don't make a draw for every $1 million invoice that I pay. You know, my experience with my dealers has been they get better deals, they have more interest when I have a larger block size. So if I can accumulate a couple of weeks worth of invoices and sell a $5 million note, I'm going to get a better rate. There's going to be more interest. So, you know, tracking those invoices, that takes some time. One of the other things that you have to do is, you know, we've got the list of fees that we have. Dealers, you have to pay them quarterly, so you have to keep a database of all the paper that particular dealer has issued, what your average outstanding is, because they're going to bill you quarterly. You have to be able to prove that what they're billing is accurate. Your credit agreement, that one is paid just off of the total amount that you can issue. That doesn't vary based on the bar that's outstanding. They're going to charge you for the whole amount. So that's paid quarterly also, but that one's a little bit easier to make sure they're paying, that they're charging accurately, because it's just gonna be based off the total. Your issuing paying agent, that one's paid annually. I'm guesstimating, because I haven't had a year's worth of this program, but I'm thinking it's gonna be about $2,000 for the year, and they bill you that annually. Your rating agencies, they're gonna review this credit once a year, so you're gonna have to go through a process with them. I haven't gone through that yet, but you know, that's another thing that you're gonna have to deal with. My experience, it's not overwhelming. They just give you, their standard questions. So you've got, that one's paid annually also. Your interest, of course, that's gonna be the big one. The way it works now is, with my issuing paying agent, I have to have the money of the interest payment to them the day prior to the roll of the notes. So that one, you just have to put that on your calendar, make sure that it's calculated correctly, and of course, just track what's happening with your dealers. So that, I mean, that's really the ongoing function. And then on the day, or when you're actually planning a sale, what I would do, or what I do is, usually about a day or two prior to needing money, I'll call my dealers, and I typically access both of my dealers at the same time. So I'll call them both and I'll tell them, I've got $5 million that I need to sell, and I'll give them my target date, and tell them this is what I'll typically tell them is, please don't sell past this time. If you need to sell short and remarket this later, fine with that, because they're the ones that know where the hiccups are in the market. So I try not to, I put very little constraints on them as possible. I mean, there's times you have to, but I prefer to let them go out and vet the market. So I'll do that. I'll tell them this is what I need. I will call my issuing paying agent, because they're the bank for this transaction. They're the ones that will get the proceeds and then send them out again. They're the ones that pay the interest and such. I'll call them. I'll give them notice of the par amount that I'm issuing. That's pretty much all I can tell, and who the dealer is. And so then they're also, they're queued, ready to pay interest when that roll happens. And then, so then the day of, well, I'll also talk to both dealers just to get a feel for what they think rates are going to be. And they'll usually give me a range. They'll tell me what they're seeing happening, what their target date is going to be, and if it's shorter than what I've asked for. So then on the day of the sale that morning, my dealers will call me just to make sure that nothing's changed, and I'll talk to them, tell them that we're still on. Within 2 hours, they're back to me with what the final sale was. I'll turn around, send that to my issuing paying agent, because that needs to match up to what they're getting from the dealer. And then if it's for new money, I'll have money in the bank that I have to take care of, invest, or whatever I'm going to do with the proceeds. And that's pretty much it for the next roll. What I've noticed also is that dealers on their own will build up lot size. So if I'm selling $5 million every week with a particular dealer, they'll sometimes try to write it out to the next week that they know I'm going to sell, so they can build up their own block size to 10 million. So they've got their own strategies that make this a better product for them, or easier for them to sell and get better rates. So, and then part of the credit agreement, the bank that we deal with wants to know on a weekly basis what the amount that we have outstanding, just so they can have it, because they don't. If I only had 20 million outstanding, they want to know that within a week or two they couldn't be liable for the whole 100 million. So they just ask weekly at the end of the week, just send me notice, tell me what you have outstanding. So that's the weekly function. Monthly, we send them our budget report that goes to the board. They just want to keep track of us as a credit. And there's other requirements we also have to tell them when we send that in that we haven't defaulted on any of the covenants. So that's one of the other things that I have to send them. Annually, I'm going to have to send them a CAFR, my budget. So there's ongoing, there's ongoing processes here, but it's doable. Just make a checklist. Is there any questions about the process?
Ricardo, as a financial advisor, are there particular clients or characteristics of the clients in which you would recommend a CP program to as opposed to others that you maybe would say, well, this may not be good for you?
Yeah, with CP being a variable rate product, I think we wouldn't advise clients with probably less than 250 or 300 million outstanding and to get into this sort of product. I mean, also, like Lisa mentioned, the school district has numerous campuses that are having $2 million, $3 million pieces getting done on a various time frame. So it worked out for them. If you're a district that has, say, 250 outstanding, you're calling 200 or 250, you know, this might be a product that you might want to look at. If you're building a bunch of new large schools, you know, maybe not so. I think the soft-put variable rate structure might be better. But for issuers like SAISD that have 50 campuses that are getting work done, you know, throughout the year, it benefited them to get into this sort of product. So I think that you have to be mindful of the rating agencies and what they think and how much your bond portfolio is diversified. In this case, you know, we would suggest 20%. So if you had 250 million outstanding and you were calling an election, we might recommend a $50 million CP program just to start the process. Also, as it comes to market risk, and right now we're in a market where but this product is not something that should be done all the time. We are in a particular market right now that lends itself, as you can see on the, kind of tough to read, but on the, from 2008, 2009 to the right side, the darker line is the line of what you typically would have seen for a fixed rate issue. The variable rate short-term rates are the yellow and the green line. And so there's a big discrepancy between the two. And in this particular time, we would say, okay, it might be a good time to take that benefit, which is 250 to 300 basis points. It's the difference between paying 0.5% on debt and 4% on debt. That's a significant difference. As you can see in the years, 5 through 7, where the yellow line and the dark line are together, we wouldn't recommend being in a variable rate mode at that point. Why? Because it makes more sense to fix out your debt between that 2 and 3 year period than to get that's taking on significant market risk and only getting a benefit of, say, 25 or 50 basis points. We suggest issuers, you know, do it at a time when they can benefit from the market between 200 and 300 basis points. And we've been in that market, you know, for 5 years now. Do we see rates going up? To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, and if they did, they probably wouldn't be doing what they're doing. But all we can tell you is that people have been saying, the big boys have been saying, rates are going up, rates were going up, and as you can see, they've done the complete opposite. They've had their times when they spiked, but as you can see, the short-term market has remained steady, and we don't see that spiking anytime soon. The last time the Fed started raising interest rates, they rose them on a quarter or 50 basis point movement, you know, on each meeting. So it's nothing that came drastically, and we're definitely not in a market where there would be massive increases in the Fed funds rate.
Very good. I think that puts us right at 1 o'clock. And I just want to say thank you very much for your questions. You guys really made the presentation for us. It's a lot better answering questions than going through the PowerPoint. But one last call for any questions. All righty. Thank you, guys.